If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this.
Outdoorsy folks, share your eeriest, creepiest, or strangest camping, hiking, or backwoods encounters, whether it's a mysterious creature sighting or a weird paranormal experience deep in the woods.
Collecting sage on the res. I'm Native American and collect sage on our res in a beautiful river gorge. I took my buddy with me, and we ended up high on a primitive road miles from the highway overlooking said gorge. It was already dark, but there was a warm wind coming off the river. He had never been on native land, and I told him we thanked the earth and asked permission before taking her bounties. Cheesy? Maybe, but I'm not taking chances and I'm always respectful. He's so white he's translucent, I call him alabaster, but he's always been respectful about native customs. We kept hearing what sounded like tiny rabbits in the scrubby sagebrush around us. There were some scrubby brush and trees that were dense and maybe 15 feet high. We were on res land, not where houses were, though. I thought maybe someone let their horses or livestock graze, as there was a large metal trough right where we were hearing the small animal chitter. The chitter was high-pitched and sounded freaking adorable. At night, it's completely dark outside. My buddy wandered near the trough that was set off the primitive road and in the scrubby trees, not really accessible to livestock or horses. It was surrounded by sage and brush but looked brand new and shiny. When my buddy got closer, something very large, larger than his 6'2" frame, came loudly crashing through the brush. We heard branches and brush snapping like a large wild animal was charging through dense brush. We couldn't see anything, nor did I want to. I did my signature round 'em up whistle. Yeah, I'm aware whistling at night isn't good. We scurried to the car, apologized to whatever we disturbed, and left the area. More in-depth story from northern Alaska. In the fall of 2018, I was going to be leaving for a while, so the night before I was due to leave, I visited my cousins and my deaf aunt one last time for the year. We talked/signed about a lot. From our lives then, to what it may be like when I return and be in their kids' lives as their uncle. Relationships in indigenous communities are different than Western systems, and my cousins' kids will be/are my nieces and nephews. As the night grew on and the sun faded beyond the horizon, we felt as if we were being watched. At the time, I smoked cigarettes. Despite the eerie feeling of eyes following our every move, my cousins and I went out to have one. My aunt had already gone outside, and little did we know, she had brought a high-powered light with her. When we got outside, she was turning night to day in the willows across the street from the house, and we didn't know why until we looked. In the willows stood 4 to 6 small people. They looked like anyone else in the village, but they wore clothes made of skins rather than newer materials brought in. Their eyes glowed, and one bared its teeth. Thinking about this just freaks me out. The Innuligarat stared at us as we stared back. All of us knew we would be safe, so we smoked our cigs and then took one last look across the road. My aunt turned off the spotlight, and when she did, the little ones began to move. We could not track where they went with our eyes because of how fast they were. Like blurs, they moved in the willows and built up what they could to hide themselves, and that is when we turned and all ran inside. For the next few hours, the front door was knocked on every 3 to 4 minutes, and rocks were thrown at the windows from the willows across the way. I didn't leave until morning, when the light just barely tipped over the mountains. I could feel the little one's eyes watching me as I walked out to my four-wheeler, but I maintained a brave face and quickly left the area. Looking back, had we pointed or shown any signs of being scared or angry, we probably would have been harassed even more, but to this day, I still consider the Innuligarat to be just distant relatives. This is my third alarming experience in the last couple of years in NEPA and state game lands. A couple of days ago I was hiking with my 2 dogs on some trails. Some of the hike was along power lines. I know this area well, I grew up on the other side of the power lines. I've since moved and came into the area a different route than I typically took from my old house. The majority of the hike was fine until I went down an old quad trail that was pretty grown in. I know the trail, and it leads down to a very old quarry, maybe 2 miles. As we hiked, my dogs stayed behind me, which is unusual, but they were still exploring off trail and romping around, so I didn't feel alarmed. Eventually we crested the trail and hit a decent clearing, and I suddenly heard a low voice say, "Help." I keep moving, slow my speed, and look around. My dogs are near me and not alerting and being as invisible as possible. At this point, I sense it's time to turn, and as I do so, a low voice calls out to me, "Turn back." I'm terrified at this point, and so are my dogs, so we hightail it out of there and head the hell home. If it were a person, my dogs would have alerted me to that. The creature must be the mimic I've encountered before, based on my prior experiences. That was the first time I hiked those woods in over a year. This is the scariest story of my life in Appalachia. This event happened maybe 2 to 3 years ago. I have lived in southern West Virginia my entire life. The woods and mountains surround every direction you look, and nighttime is a darkness that you can never dream of unless experienced. I was with a friend, I'll call him Mark. Mark was at my house one evening, doing the usual things, watching UFC, playing Xbox, etc. It was extremely late when we finally got bored and decided to go for a walk on a nearby trail to smoke a joint. This is not a particularly long trail, but it is very dense in the woods that surround it, and it is easy to get freaked out when thinking of your surroundings. We finally get to about halfway into the trail, about 30 minutes in, where we stop, pack our joint, and stand on the trail to chill and talk. The forest is very alive tonight. There are always noises in the woods, but the amount of animal activity for the time, at this point it was probably past 1 a.m. This was strange and kind of eerie, but not alerting, as any sort of predatory animal in the area may cause a disturbance. We finish smoking and continue our walk when almost immediately the forest falls dead quiet. And as soon as the forest goes quiet, there is a voice. It almost sounds like a mocking, humanoid voice, shaky and uncertain. Almost like an old children's toy, like the ones with the crackly speakers and robotic voice, if you know what I mean. This immediately sets us off. We bolt directly down the opposite length of the trail, but the sound does not gain distance. It doesn't get closer, per se, but no matter how far we ran down the trail, this eerie voice remained the same volume, going over and over with no quieting or stopping. At this point, I am convinced that we are in genuine danger, something I have felt very few times. Finally, after sprinting for who knows how long, we exit the trail, gasping for breath and almost at the verge of tears from how frightening this was. We begin to exit the trail, and about 5 minutes from the exit, there is a bone-shaking, heart-stopping, murderous scream from directly behind us. I know what a mountain lion sounds like. This was not an animal. This was not someone playing or watching a movie. This scream sent birds flying from nests and made my heart drop into my stomach. It was the most genuinely depraved and violent scream that I have ever heard. This is a true story that I have only told to maybe 3 people, all of whom seem to brush it off as false. I've never been a person to push for the existence of the paranormal or spiritual, but I genuinely believe I encountered something inhuman in those woods. I never saw anything, but I had a strange experience that matches up with a lot of the lore of the little people. I had to be around 7 or 8, and my grandma babysat me every day on her huge farm. I would spend entire days roaming the woods with my BB gun and playing like kids that age. One time, I walked into a clearing that I had never noticed before, even though I knew those woods like the back of my hand. Everything was bright, and I mean bright. Like the sunshine itself had a physical quality. There were bees and other insects buzzing around the flowers that were everywhere, and deer and rabbits frolicking everywhere. The thing that made it really weird at the time was the physical quality of the sunlight. I've never experienced it since. I went back the next day looking for that meadow, and it was completely gone, as if it didn't even exist. I spent literal years searching for that place, and I never found it. It was so strange. How everything seemed to be imbued with its own light. Even the animals. Later, when I was older, I read about people having the same kind of experience where they accidentally wandered into a strange place like that. Supposedly that's the little people's land, and I have no idea how I ended up there. Singing in the woods. I've been getting more acclimated to camping as a solo female. I'm pretty comfortable in the woods for the most part. I feel safe and at home. This was my first time solo camping in the area I'm from, so it felt particularly special. I camped in a rugged and remote part of WNC, off a gravel road, right by a creek. After having dinner by the fire, I settled in my tent, the air of early spring growing colder. As I'm trying to get cozy and drift off, I hear what I can only describe as a woman singing. Despite my skepticism, I understand that our senses can deceive us. I've definitely heard things before when there's a monotonous sound like the river, so I tried to brush it off. But it had range, it wasn't consistent at all, as if there was a tune to it. At this point I froze, holding my breath. The singing sound would stop and then start again. Honestly, I was terrified. Eventually I had to suck it up and go pee. The moon was full, so I could see nothing there at all. All I could see in the night was the beautiful creek. I continued to hear it for a little while longer before a very poor sleep. That's all, nothing crazy. But I just know what I heard. I don't have an explanation for it. Perhaps there is a spirit in the river? Spooky. Marquette County Woods Encounter. In late summer of 2019, I'd say maybe a couple of miles away from Montello. I was walking through the woods in Marquette County, Wisconsin. I decided to go in the night after dark because there would be no heat, and I didn't want to get heat stroke out there. I was taking a walk on a foot trail that some people had created and used, but it's not an actual trail on any maps. Anyways, moments before the experience happened, I checked my phone, and it was 1:42 a.m. A couple of minutes later I hear a "Hey, bro, can you please help me?" from a direction I was facing. I said, "With what?" They said, "Come closer," which prompted me to run back the way I came. As I was being chased, I heard, "I need some help, bro." Funny enough, a deputy was driving by as I floored it out of there as the dude hit my car with a knife, scratched my truck a bit, and dented it. This happened in September. No, the deputy did not do anything, as I don't think they really cared. I've been thinking about this for years, and I am still baffled. When I was about 11 years old, I lived near the river in Pulaski County on very private land. There was only one road, no walkthroughs were allowed, and the area was fenced off. Behind our property was a river, and we could walk to it, but anyone trying to access the property would have to boat or swim in, stumble through the woods, stumble through a large garden we had, and stumble through a larger yard with huge floodlights that were motion sensing. In front of the house were more dense woods and our private road, one way in, one way out, more porch lights, and at the end of that road was a steel gate. So I was maybe 9 or 10, and I wanted to catch fireflies. My mom agreed and gave me a mason jar. I then went outside and informed her that I was going to turn off the front porch light to better observe the fireflies. She said it was okay, but told me not to go to the tree line. So I was out there for 6 or 7 fireflies worth. When I started, it did not move, nor did it turn, shake, or rotate in any way. Swinging in between some trees. It did not move, nor did it turn, shake, or rotate in any way. I stared at it for a while, fascinated and scared but trying to puzzle out what it was. It appeared to be a ball and not a beam and was definitely well defined. I was starting to get past my fascination, and I was getting scared. Then another appeared further in the trees, maybe 5 feet further back. They were literally just hanging there in the air. The solitary balls of light were clearly defined. I decided enough was enough and ran to the house. My parents said I was hysterical enough to warrant a thorough search of the property, and my mom called the police, who came out. No one found anything. No evidence of a fire, lanterns hung in trees as a joke, nothing. I already knew it was neither, but I hoped someone would figure it out. I was in deep shit with my dad, who told me I was making up nonsense, and I got the belt and was put on a diet of stacking wood for the winter, housework, etc. My dad was splitting. Does anyone have an idea what this might have been? Skinwalker? This happened to my great-grandfather in northern New Mexico. He told the story to my grandfather, and my grandfather told it to me. My great-grandfather had been noticing that certain things around the farm were missing or misplaced. It wasn't just specific things, all sorts of things, from tools to pencils to feed buckets. Anyway, he kept noticing a coyote around the farm as well and noticed that every time he was looking for something, he'd catch the coyote in the corner of his eye. As soon as he would get ready to get a rifle to shoot the coyote, it was gone. One day he decided that he would get up earlier than usual and have his horse ready with a gun in its scabbard so he could try and catch the coyote coming onto his property. Sure enough, the coyote stepped out of the tree line right as the sun came up. The coyote saw him and bolted. He gave chase and caught up to it near some pine trees that had all grown together. He chased the coyote around the trees and finally got his rifle on it. As soon as this happened, the coyote stopped and turned into an old lady. She begged my great-grandfather not to shoot her. He apparently knew who she was and told her that no harm should come to his family and she should stay off his land, otherwise, he would kill her. Following that incident, there were no other missing or misplaced items on the farm. I can't verify the story because my great-grandfather died before I was born. My grandfather said this story had to have been true because his father never lied and there was a lot of witchcraft going on in the area. People are still superstitious in that area. In fact, if you're an outsider, they won't even talk to you. I volunteered with a search and rescue group, and we were frequently dispatched to remote areas looking for missing people, recoveries, and occasionally crime scene searches. We were called out one day after a logging company had unearthed a backpack belonging to a man who had been missing for over 20 years. The initial search for the man had been massive. Hundreds of people, dogs, and a massive community effort. Nothing was ever found. I have not found a single clue. Our team spent over an hour crawling on unmaintained logging roads. The area had wild horses, which I had never even heard of in our area. It was remote. From the jump, we had some weird technical issues. My teammate's brand new Dodge truck stalled out on the logging road. I carry a litany of tools, jumper cables, a tow rope, etc., and the Dodge was dead. I don't remember if we towed it to the side or what we did, but there was no fixing the issue. The truck wouldn't turn on, no lights, no electrical, but the battery was fine. My rig's fog lights suddenly went out as well. They never came back on. I chalked it up to the extremely rough terrain knocking them loose. A handful of us who were first on the scene descended through the Devil's Club hillside and immediately found one shoe, then another, and a few pieces of clothing as we got further down to the creek at the bottom. We found a mandible and then the top part of the skull within the first 10 to 15 minutes. The clothing matched the description of the missing man on the bolo flyers we had been given. One of my teammates sat down for a break and picked up a rib that was next to him. We had been up and down the hill he sat on and hadn't even noticed the human rib scattered there. That was odd. We were all trained to grid search and had done so. Had we merely overlooked 5+ ribs that were lying plainly on the ground? Maybe. It was full of Devil's Club and brutal landscape. The clothing and bones were out in the open. Our old maps from the original search showed this area was searched. It happens, maybe the guy was on the move and these weren't here during the initial search. I drove out of the scene to grab a sheriff who was going to guard the scene overnight. We had flagged every fork we took with fluorescent flagging tape, as the logging roads were not marked, were missing the hash sign that usually sat at every fork, and were not well maintained. We were at least an hour off any paved road. I had noted the direction we took at every fork on the way in, right, left, etc. I was thankful I had. Our flagging markers were gone. I usually stayed out at sites overnight, as I didn't have children at the time. I chose not to stay at this site. It just felt off. On another search for a lost hunter, we stumbled across hanging figures in the trees, made of twigs and moss and lashed together with tall grass or vines, straight up Blair Witch style. This would have been a few years after the Blair Witch Project came out. Although the team was accustomed to seeing strange things in the woods, these were unsettling. We camped overnight at that spot as we hadn't found the person. We slept in a circle with a small campfire in the middle. It was fall, headed into winter and cold. We just had sleep sacks and bivy sacks, no tents or tarps. When we woke up, there was a small bundle of twigs lashed together with vines by our fire. We initially blamed our team clown, who was always pulling pranks. The look on his face told us it wasn't him. I had no idea what or who it could have been. Many of the old-timers swore that they had seen, heard, or smelled Bigfoot. These were tough men, many had military or law enforcement experience, and they weren't the kind of guys to get scared. A few years ago, I was on a trail run after a good snow. I decided to run about 20 miles in the opposite direction from my usual route, and this took me to a section of the trail I'd never seen before. The trail runs on top of a levee that is surrounded by flat farmland on one side and a river on the other, then it turns right into a small, semicircle-shaped wooded area with tons of skinny trees. While the trees are packed in, you can pretty much see all the way through them. There was a clearing with a bench facing the river. It struck me as beautiful, so I stopped for a few minutes to admire the view and snap a picture before running on. On my way back, I glanced at the spot again and decided I wanted to take a picture of this spot once every season. I made the trek in the spring, a few times in the summer, and then twice in the fall. I wasn't happy with the original fall picture I took. I went back a week later when the leaf colors looked a little better. The second fall trip was the last time I've ever gone. Everything was normal as I ran into the clearing by the bench and pulled out my phone. I tried to frame the picture so that it would be the same shot, and then everything felt wrong. My heart started pounding, my hair stood up, and my spine tingled. It was the worst fear I've ever felt. I started fumbling around with my phone, trying to put it back in my armband. It felt like someone was in the woods behind me watching me, but they weren't just watching me. I was being sized up, thought about, and possibly chosen. It was dangerous. It felt like whoever was watching me wanted to hurt me or snatch me. I turned around and scanned the entire area surrounding the bench, waiting to see some drug-addicted murderer pop up out of a camouflaged area. Like I said, you could see clear through the trees. No one was there. In fact, everything was dead quiet. I hadn't noticed that everything was abnormally silent. I stood there staring and scanning, waiting to see anything because my feeling was so strong. I don't know why, but I strongly felt that if I just booked it, this person or thing would be triggered, but I needed to leave right then. I tried to swallow every ounce of terror I felt, pretended like everything was normal, and ran at a medium pace back towards the levee. Once I was in the open on the levee, I took off. But here's the weirder part, I felt like I wasn't out of danger yet. My spine kept tingling like something was behind me, and I needed to keep pushing forward as fast as I could. I know this sounds crazy, but I didn't feel like it was a person anymore, and it could pop up at any moment and snatch me even though I was getting farther away. I kept thinking it wanted to snatch me. I normally don't use that word, but that is the word that specifically popped into my mind. It wasn't until I was about 2 miles away that I felt like I was out of its zone and I was safe. It took me a long time to calm down after I got in my car and went home. I truly felt like I was in danger. Whistling at night? I got the shit scared out of me in my Airbnb. Last winter I stayed in a super rural Airbnb for about a week. This happened the night before my last night there. Really nothing odd happened the whole week. The woods were completely dark, and you couldn't see any lights from other houses, which was great for me. The whole place had huge windows all around looking into the woods, and that night I was walking around one of the rooms when I heard a quick, sharp whistle from outside. I genuinely don't get scared easily by things outside in the night anymore, but it was so weird that the instant I heard it, my eyes and nose started watering with fear. I stood there kind of paralyzed for a second before I heard another whistle and just instantly went to close all the curtains and blinds and turned off the lights. I don't know why I felt the need to do that, but I sat there in the dark on the floor so full of fear that my nose was literally dripping and tears were pooling in my eyes. I had the windows fully open so I could hear the whistle intermittently getting closer until it sounded like it was literally right outside, and I was shitting ducking bricks for some reason, which was just freaking me out more. I was straining to hear whether I could hear footsteps and whether it might just be a person. I kept hearing weird noises, but nothing that sounded at all like a person walking, nothing that sounded like anything discernible. That is it. I waited for what felt like forever until I hadn't heard the whistle for a long time and ended up crawling into bed and not looking out any of the windows. This event just stays in my mind because of how seemingly irrationally scared I was. I walk around in the woods at night regularly and have even run into hunters and weird-ass people, and I was not once so scared that I felt like that. I silently sat on the floor with my nose and eyes dripping and kept thinking, why am I doing this? And I just could not make myself move and look out the window or do anything. And I lived in this area for 25 years before that. I'm very familiar with the wildlife noises, and I don't believe the sound was any bird or animal. Sometimes when I think of it, I can still feel the fear so much that my eyes water again, and I just wonder WTF that was. Has anyone experienced anything like this? The hollers. Growing up in rural Alaska, I experienced a lot. A lot of weird things, amazing herds of caribou, etc., but the weirdest things to me are the times I wasn't able to see the source of yelling or hollering. A lot of times, I traveled alone throughout the Brooks Range and up onto the North Slope to hunt and trap. From a young age, I learned how to hunt and field dress animals, set up survival shelters, and even travel at night with the help of the constellations, like my ancestors before me. These long and very arduous journeys sometimes brought me more than I was willing to endure. In the winter of, 2017, I had a trap line along the left side of a valley headed northbound. A trap was set every few miles, and I was traveling along my trail when I saw a figure in a bunch of diamond willows ahead of me. The bunch of brush was about a mile or so away, but I could see the dark figure walking like a person. I wondered who would be out in January when it's the coldest time of the year, just walking when they suddenly vanished. I took out my binoculars and scanned the area, and I just put it off as my imagination or someone with a snowmobile, snow machine for you lower 48ers, who had taken off along my trail. So, I continued on. At my next trap, I stopped and shut off my machine. It was calm and surprisingly warm, around 30 degrees Fahrenheit, for that time of the year, so I was able to shed my parka to reset the spring trap that I had come across. As I set the trap, I started to hear a low, bellowing noise from up in a small valley. It came off like a person just yelling "ah" at first, but then it grew deeper, like a bear warning off another, which seemed unusual for January. Nothing like that would be out and about. The most you'd find would be wolves, wolverines, and caribou. Even moose tend to travel south during winter. As I started to pack up, the noise began again. It grew louder and louder. I remembered that figure I saw and wondered if they had anything to do with it, but I did my best to ignore the noise like my elders had taught me and go about my business. Then I could feel eyes on me. I looked towards the valley where I felt the weird sensation, and there was nothing. I even pulled out my binos and looked. Nothing. I listened for the noise again, and when the bellowing began, I responded. I did the same noise back at it, and it stopped quickly. Like it recognized the noise I made. Then it all was silent. I was uneasy, so I packed up and left as quickly as possible. I haven't been back there since. I pulled the trap line that winter. I don't intend to go back. I'm from a semi-rural town out in the Ohio side of the Appalachian foothills. We have a lot of folklore in the area, but I actually experienced something spooky back in the autumn of 2020. My family loves going on drives, and I especially love the quietness of night drives. I was home visiting and went on a night drive with my brother and cousin tagging along. Since it was the start of autumn, I suggested we drive out to one of the old cemeteries near where my mom used to live. It is settled on a hill, bordered by hundreds of acres of woods and farms, spotty cell reception, if any, and listed as a non-GPS route. While all of this sounds sketchy, the area is really beautiful, and my family hunts out there, never having encountered any issues. Folks are nice, and it's far enough from town that you don't deal with many of the problems there, drugs, crime, etc. It was about 2 a.m., and this was going to be the last stop before heading back to my brother's place to sleep. The route I would normally take was blocked due to bridge work and forced us to take a literal dirt road through the woods. I've taken that road one other time, so the bridge closure didn't deter me from getting to the cemetery. We arrived at the cemetery, and I was stopped at one of the forks, deciding where to park so we could get out and walk around. The windows were down since I was smoking when I heard a whistle. Not a bird whistle, but a person whistle, like if you were trying to get someone's attention. This confused me since it's the middle of the night, the middle of nowhere, and very close by. My brother asks if I heard that, confirming to myself that my ears did not deceive me, and as I pause to listen for anything else, the silence is broken by my brother panicking. He points to one of the taller headstones about 20 to 30 feet from the car, yelling, "What is that?" The only way I can describe this is that we saw what looked like a very large person bear crawling and darting between tombstones toward my car. It was very humanoid in figure but looked hairy and lanky. There are moments in life where your lizard brain kicks in like, "Hey, you're in danger. Please run." And this was one. I whipped out of that cemetery so fast I was worried I was going to pop a tire or spin out. We made it back to his place safely, hardly slept, and recounted our experience to each other in the morning, confirming that we all did in fact hear/see that. I have been back to that cemetery since, with our hunting dog, but have not experienced anything like that again, thankfully. I was in my last year before retiring from the Army and was going through a divorce. My soon-to-be ex went back to Texas with my 2 girls, and I planned to move closer to them once my retirement was official. I rented a small 2-bedroom in Tian in a town called Mound. Mound was out of the way and really isolated. My commute sucked, but it was cheap and peaceful. I had no neighbors, across the street was all conservation land for miles. A swamp was on one side and around the back of the property, the closest house on the other side was out of shouting distance. I enjoyed living there initially. Before this, I lived in the suburbs, and all the noise, people, and traffic drove me crazy. One night I came home around 1 in the morning from a concert in Nashville. It was early spring, and it was foggy out. The house was approximately 0.8 of a mile from the road, and the driveway sloped downward. As I pulled in, I saw a huge black dog standing in the front yard. It looked like a black lab or a lab mixed breed. It stood with its head up and its tail straight up. It was fixed on me. I slowly pulled my car up, unsure what to do next, when it turned and ran into the swamp. I didn't think much of it and went inside. Over the following few months, things started happening at night. I would always wake up around 3 or so in the morning, thinking I heard voices outside my window, and sometimes it sounded like someone, or a couple of people, was whispering to each other, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. Sometimes I would hear footsteps and movement outside. I thought it was maybe a deer or that dog, but when I looked out, I saw nothing. These occurrences continued for months. One night I woke up to a noise and saw it was 2:57. A bright white light shone through the porch glass doors. I ran out into the kitchen and looked through the small sink window, and it looked like someone was out in the swamp shining a spotlight. It was one of those high-powered lights used in search and rescue. It was blinding and lit up the whole kitchen. I opened the back doors and ran out onto the porch, yelling that I was going to call the cops. The light went out, and I heard someone moving away from the house through the swamp. Police arrived, took a report, instructed me to lock my doors, and advised me to call if anything else occurred. I was hyper-vigilant for the next few days. I checked behind me when I was coming and going and always slept with the shades drawn and doors locked. The footsteps around the house continued, and some nights, I thought I could hear a dog panting outside my window, although I never found tracks or saw signs of an animal in the morning. Things died down after a while, and I was about 3 months away from the end of my lease. I woke up around 3 in the morning, scared out of my mind. I was sleeping and heard a woman calling my name in my dream. When the voice called my name again, clearly as day, I opened my eyes and realized it was a dream. I shot up out of bed and turned on the lights. I checked in the closet and under the bed. I opened the bedroom door and listened out in the hallway. I couldn't hear anything and was about to cut the lights and go back to bed when someone started pounding on my front door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was like someone was bashing the door with a sledgehammer. I yelled out that I had a gun and to get the duck off my property. I said I called the cops, and I'll blow your ducking head off before they get here. The pounding stopped. Cops came out again and took another report. There was no visible damage to the door or footprints around the property. It all just stopped after that. I did buy a 9mm, but the rest of my time renting there was without incident. I've returned to Texas, residing in a suburban apartment complex, and I'm content with my situation. The backwoods of Tennessee felt eerie and unsettling. A few years ago I was holidaying in New Zealand with a group of friends. This rural bed and breakfast we stayed at had hot spring baths nearby, bubbling out of the ground in a temperate rainforest. Unlike tropical rainforests, NZ has temperate, i.e., cold, rainforests. We went in there late at night and hiked through the forest to these baths. The weather was freezing, drizzling, and windy, typical NZ weather. After enjoying it for a few hours, the group wanted to leave, but I wanted to stay another hour, relax without conversation, and keep soaking in these beautiful hot mineral baths. The 3 to 4 baths had a few dull lamps lighting up the area, but everything outside of this was utterly pitch black. There was a fast-running river stream right next to it. So they left, and almost immediately I got an unnerving and increasing sense of unease. Like an unnatural blackness and dread were being projected at me. I ignored it for quite a while, but this bizarre fear just kept building and building until I felt there were literally things jumping out of the darkness at me. I started to panic and could not understand why or what was causing it. Now I'll tell you, I grew up in rural areas and spent a lot of time tramping through forests in the dead of night in Australia and have never, ever, experienced or felt anything like this. It was real and foreboding and hair-raising. Annoyingly, I decided to give up my relaxing bath and hike it the hell out of there. When I got back, the experience was so real and vivid I straight up told the locals who ran the B&B what happened and why I left early. They casually responded, "Oh yes, that's the river spirit. Maori name, he probably was getting annoyed you were there and wanted you to leave. Nobody should be out there at night by themselves." Yeah, thanks for that timely advice. 3 years ago I decided to take fly fishing back up. Like most stories here, it was a heavily overcast day with fog and drizzling rain in February. The girlfriend and I decided to drive to the Washita River for some rainbow fishing. The location on the river borders the town and features a large pull-off below the bridge. As expected, we were the only ones there. We get ready and head down to the river. We were fishing for around 2 hours without much luck and working our way upriver from the bridge and the truck. We were approximately 150 yards away from the truck, and my girlfriend was 30 yards ahead of me, positioned around a bend and out of sight from the road. By now it's almost 5 p.m. and fixing to be dark anyway. I see 2 guys approaching from the truck. I think, great. This is embarrassing. Still relearning to cast with a fly rod. I quickly realize they are not there to fish and are plenty out of place. They appeared to be in their young 20s or late teens and were dressed like thugs. One was on his phone texting, the other did all the talking. He said he was hiding from the cops because he didn't have a license, and they saw him driving and pulled a U. He told me his troubles with fines and how he was picked on by Johnny Law. Now I had quit fishing and was rigging up to go when the guy on his phone walked up and sat on a log behind my girlfriend. As I approached her, the other guy headed towards the bridge. I got to her and said, "Fishing sucks. Let's go try another spot." Now at this point when we turn to go to the truck, the guy on the log gets up and starts to walk behind me and to my left. My fly rod was in my left hand. I wasn't really worried. What punks would pick a fight with a 230 pounds bearded mountain man driving a lifted F-250? Then I realized the guy behind us is on his phone but not talking, and his buddy was up at the path to the truck at the bridge, also on his phone, and the guy behind is trying to make small talk with me while on the phone. I got the feeling they were on the phone with each other. I see the guy behind me in my periphery bend over and get a slightly larger than fist-sized rock. I thought, this is it. I'm going to have to shoot these punks. I planned if he lifted the rock towards me, I'm busting him in the mouth with the fly rod and drawing the G19 from concealment, plugging him and then his buddy up ahead. While my plan is forming, my girlfriend picks up a 4-foot broom handle-sized green beaver stick and says this is perfect for beating people in the head. By this point we were at the path, and the other guy walked over to his buddy as we walked to the truck. At this point they were in deep stuff if they wanted funny business, as I was at my real firepower once I got to the truck gun. We loaded up, took our time, and left without incident. I have never wanted my shepherd with me as badly as I did then. They definitely were up to no good. Then there's the time I heard a guy trying to break into my truck. Well, I popped out of the woods in time to see the tweaker peeking in my windows. He sees the 10mm strapped to my chest and changes his mind real fast. I'm a former hobbyist paranormal investigator and a long-time seasoned ghost tour guide. The supernatural runs deep in my veins, and while I don't have a sixth sense, I've been in situations ranging from being stalked by a spirit in an abandoned insane asylum to a close encounter with the skunk ape, both stories for another time. Before I go to sleep tonight, allow me to share with you the story of the sunken graveyard. When I was in my late teens, a friend and fellow occult enthusiast told me about the sunken graveyard outside of Gainesville, FL, closer to the town of Alachua. The graveyard was so old and shallow that the caskets had rotted through and collapsed the dirt above. Some of the graves date back to the period immediately following the end of Spanish rule. So obviously, I wanted to see this for myself. So, with my friend and several other normal buddies, who came along only because it was a slow night, we trekked into the back roads littered with potholes and gravel so sharp you feared a flat tire far more than an evil spirit. Still, being barely 20, many of us found ways to egg each other on. One way to prepare for our experience in the graveyard was to walk the last quarter mile to it alone and in the dark. My friend, who had visited it before, said that local legend stated the road to the graveyard was equally haunted and that I should experience it. Not to turn down a challenge of the paranormal nature, and because I had a crush on a couple of the girls in our party and wanted to appear cooler than I had a right to be, I got out of the car, and while everyone laughed as they drove on, I walked. It was eerily quiet, much like others in here mentioned. Florida woods have a way of being devoid of everything at times of darkness. Still, I made it to my friends without interruption 10 minutes later. The sunken graveyard was more disturbing than I expected. In addition to its extreme remoteness and numerous left and right turns down lonely rural farm roads, the graveyard backed up to a deep and desolate rock quarry. The forest had engulfed the graveyard and merged with it. There was no clear defining perimeter or structure. Graves were scattered throughout the woods, beneath trees and inside underbrush. But each grave came with its own little sinkhole of decay and death. Several girls in our group opted to stay with the vehicles. We teased them for being afraid, but honestly, in hindsight, they were the smart ones. We trudged stupidly through the scattered ranks of worn and moldy tombstones, looking for clarity of a name or date. We found very few clear inscriptions. But the deeper we went, the more foreboding it felt, and the more dense and thick the woods got around us, like they were creeping closer as we dug deeper, a predator waiting to pounce. Chaos erupted when we reached the graveyard's deep rear, where the children lay buried. Just as we reached the tomb of a little boy who died from yellow fever, the dead forest came alive. The breaking of twigs and the rustling of brush and shrubs around us lit every terror within our naive, idiotic souls, and we realized quickly that we were surrounded, but we didn't know by what. It felt as if several distinct presences were trudging in a circle around us. I don't mean presence as in a ghost, just the same feeling you get when you can feel someone, or something, nearby. It could have been anything, but whatever it was intelligent, and we had disturbed it. As if that wasn't frightening enough, we suddenly heard the holler of a drunk southerner in the distance. Rolling down the road, just visible between the breaks in the trees, was a dually-looking truck, complete with several screaming and laughing good old boys in the back, likely heading to the rock quarry to do God knows what. Suddenly the fear of them ransacking our cars or messing with our friends, including the girls I liked, overpowered the fear of whatever supernatural force was stalking around us. We bolted towards the cars. One friend fell to the right as he tripped on a fallen tree limb, and another cursed to my left as he ran headlong into a spiderweb. Minutes later we cleared the forest/graveyard and found the girls huddled inside one of the cars, hiding. The duo never even stopped. According to one of the girls, the duo made a 3-point turn as soon as they saw our vehicles parked at the end of the road. It is likely that whatever they wanted to do out there, they didn't want anyone to see it. The girls asked what we saw out there, but we were so out of breath from the mad dash from the graveyard to the quarry that we couldn't form coherent sentences, but while our voices were muted, we could still hear something in the woods behind us, even over our gasps for air. We may have thought we were finished with them, but they weren't with us. We shoved the girls back into the car, jumped in ourselves, and bolted down the ragged country road, not daring to tell our story until we were safely on a main road once more. I've never gone back to that graveyard. In truth, I wouldn't even remember how to, but it remains by far and away the most prominent cautionary tale in my arsenal. Let the dead lie, and don't tread on ground where time has long left alone. There's been loads of weird and creepy stuff that has occurred over the heath. I tell you about this because it was the strongest, worst feeling that Elle and I had ever felt together at the same time. We were and are always in tune with one another, although we are extremely different people. It was one of the most sinister, menacing sensations I ever experienced. I say this coming from a family of sensitives who have had paranormal and supernatural experiences all my lives. When we were 7, Mama took my cousin Elle and me over Hounslow Heath for our usual adventures that were common in the summer holidays. Instead of the regular route, we used to love collecting feathers and other natural things that we found to make collages with or picking fat, juicy blackberries off bushes for our gran to make pies with. Mama took us to one of her old haunts as a child called Paradise. Paradise was thought to have been the location of either an old coaching inn or a powder mill and was just a very stark, bare, massive open field with skeletal remains of ancient-looking stones and wood buildings and very old tree stumps that were scattered throughout the area. Over the years, Paradise had fallen victim to random attacks of arson, and the local council burned the field to keep it from becoming overgrown and unmanageable, so the appearance of Paradise was more desolate and bleak due to the burnt stubbles of grass and charred tree stumps, along with the still strong and slightly sickly smell of smoke in the air, especially when the wind caught up. The obvious differences between the otherwise lush and green area around Paradise and Paradise itself were clear to Elle and me immediately, and we said aloud at the same time, "The burnt place."
I felt uneasy straight away, and looking at Elle, I could tell she did too, although Elle was, and still is, close with her feelings.
When you grow up with someone, you know how they feel about certain things. I was in my wheelchair investigating the ground around me, and Elle was a little distance off. Mama was looking at something else. Suddenly, Elle turned to face me and said, "Shiv, can you hear anything?" I was suddenly struck by the deathly silence of the immediate area. Normally, Heath was alive with the comforting sound of birds, insects, and small animals. It was a constant, like a soundtrack to our play, but there was not a sound, nor, come to mention it, was there any evidence of any living thing. In fact, I couldn't remember seeing any animals or birds since we got to Paradise. I said this to Elle, and we both looked at the sky before continuing to investigate the burnt ground. Looking carefully, I came to the awful realization that the ground was scattered with small animal skeleton bones and skulls, charred and dirty leftovers from years of fires. Elle and I looked at each other and said at the same time, "Can we please go now?" Mama looked at us both and laughed. "What's up with you two?" We told her about the unearthly silence and the small animal skeletons. Mama just explained that it was only to be expected from a dead area, but she didn't say much about the silence. She just listened and then said, "Okay, let's go back." When we got home, we told our gran about it, and we talked all night about unnatural silence. Now we are adults, and Elle has children of her own. They ask us about our childhood, and occasionally we tell them spooky, funny stories, but anytime we both mention Paradise, it's always with uneasiness. Love this channel and thought I'd share a creepy experience I had while fishing. First, a little background information on the area. My family's property was once the site of a massive Native American civilization. We've found artifacts dating back to the Paleo period, and there is a patch of woods near a large creek with several mounds along it. Some are platform mounds, and others are dome-shaped burial mounds. As a kid, my great-grandpa, who was about 97, told me that long ago those woods used to have a reputation for being haunted, and for some odd reason, the most common report was people hearing what sounded like chains being dragged or rattled. Never understood the connection between that and Native Americans, but whatever. I always chalked it up to him just wanting me to stay out of the deep woods as a kid. But of course, telling a 12-year-old boy to stay out of the woods because it's a haunted burial ground is like saying, "Hey, you should go explore." I've spent countless hours back there hunting, fishing, looking for artifacts, etc., and never had anything strange happen aside from some occasional weird feelings until about 8 years ago. Never understood the connection between that and Native Americans, but whatever. As a child, I always assumed that he was simply warning me to avoid the deep woods. Telling a 12-year-old boy to stay out of the woods because it's a haunted burial ground is like saying, "Hey, you should go explore." I've spent countless hours back there hunting, fishing, looking for artifacts, etc., and never had anything strange happen aside from some occasional weird feelings until about 8 years ago. There was an old man who lived just down the road, and he had a huge base pond in the middle of the woods about a quarter mile behind his house. You could see it from one of our fields, and in the 12 years or so since he'd built it, I had seen him fishing maybe twice. He also turned down everybody who asked to fish there. I never understood the purpose of having a pond like that and not fishing it, but that's another story. I had no doubt it was overpopulated, and one night 4 friends and I decided we'd help him out with that problem. I regret our actions deeply and acknowledge they were wrong, but at the time, we were young and made poor decisions. So about 10 p.m. we made our way across the pasture and hopped the fence. We split up quickly at the big pond. 2 friends fished near the entrance while the rest of us went to the other side. About 20 minutes later, we heard a commotion and saw our friends turn on their flashlights. It looked like they were running back towards the fence. Eventually they stopped, and we could barely hear them talking. They walked around the pond and asked me if there were any houses or people nearby, and I told them no and asked why. He said as they were fishing, they looked across the cove and saw somebody walking along the fence line away from them, and they had sort of a glow. We had invited another friend who never showed up, and they saw it clearly enough that they thought maybe it was him. One of them even did a little bird whistle to get his attention, but the figure just kept walking and disappeared into the woods. At that point they thought maybe it was the owner, and he had a flashlight against his body trying to be sneaky, so they ran. I assured them that we were a quarter mile away from the guy's house and there was absolutely nothing but woods and fields for miles, and nobody would be back here wandering around in the middle of the night. I figured they were jumpy because we weren't supposed to be there and maybe the moonlight was playing tricks on them, and I certainly wasn't thinking of anything paranormal at this point. Keep in mind that all of us were raised in the country and spent most of our time in the woods, were not easily rattled by strange noises and such, and none of them knew the history of the property, the stories I had been told, or the fact that there were mounds about 50 yards into the woods on the back side of the pond. I was so accustomed to the situation that it didn't cross my mind. Well, they walked back around the pond, and after about an hour, the rest of us had completely circled around and made it back to them, and during that time, we'd occasionally see their lights turn on and see them shining into the woods. When we got there, they had stopped fishing and were sitting near the fence where we crossed. I asked what they were doing, and they said this place was creepy as hell and they wanted to leave. I asked why, and their exact words were, "Man, we keep hearing something jingling in those woods, like somebody is throwing a big chain on the ground," which is why they kept spotlighting the tree line. My hair stood up as I recounted my great-grandpa's words from years ago, along with the mounds in those woods. That was the final straw, as they began to gather their belongings and declared their intention to never return. The rest of us never saw or heard anything on the other side of the pond, and I'm still on the fence about the paranormal, but it gave me chills to hear them describe everything that happened with no knowledge of where we were at. And yes, that was the last time I went pond hopping there. I have quite a few weird/scary/creepy stories. Some have happened to me, while other stories were told to me by relatives. The first one I remember happened in Fort Worth, Texas. My stepfather was stationed at Carswell AFB. We used to go out to his friend's house in the boonies a lot. They had a few kids, and other friends had kids. We were out there one time, and there was a lot of talk about the goat man for some reason. All of us kids decided we would play in the woods and field behind their property while the adults did their thing. We were walking through the trees/woods and came out on the other side in a cornfield. We could see a barn down at the other end of the field, and we decided to go and check it out. As we got closer, I remember feeling uneasy and wanting to go back to the house where the adults were. Some of the older kids would have given me crap for seen out, so I didn't say anything. We got to the barn, and one of the older kids opened the main door to find dead chickens everywhere. On the floor of the barn was a pentagram with candles lit around it. There may have been other dead animals, but I distinctly remember many dead chickens. One of the older kids said we needed to get out of there, and as he said it, we all heard this awful screech/scream come from the field. We all looked towards the part of the field where it came from, and I remember seeing a ram's head, like a bighorn sheep's head, running through the field towards the barn. Instinctively we all ran back the other way to where the adults were. I don't know how far we ran, but it was at least a few hundred yards. We got back to the house, and we were all freaking out. The parents were asking what the heck was going on. I remember one of the older boys saying we saw the goat man. I remember him explaining to his dad what he saw. He told him about the barn and that whatever was running towards us had the head of a goat and the body of a man. I don't remember seeing the body, maybe because I was so short at the time or maybe because of a bad angle, but I do remember the head coming through the cornfield. They contacted police, and I'm not sure what happened after that. I asked my parents a few times after that, and they always told me to forget it and would change the subject. Haunted meadows in the Sierra Nevadas. Sharing this story because I saw a weird story about something weird that happened in an area of the Sierras. In 2015, I was completing an AmeriCorps term that involved meadow restoration. I spent 4 days off in Tahoe and 10 days in the backcountry from May to early September. We will return to this site for my last 3 projects. This all happened on the previous 2 projects. We were in a chain of meadows for a couple of projects. Our crew was 4 people. We were on a chain of meadows: Dutch Meadow, Strawberry Meadow, and Horseshoe Meadow. Usually with these sorts of projects, the Forest Service partner hikes out with them, stays the night, and then the next day shows the crew leader the worksite. When we arrived, I remember being surprised that the Forest Service partner wasn't camping out with us the first night, and he felt very rushed. He wanted to get in there, show our crew leader the worksite, and get out as fast as possible. At the time I thought it was odd but didn't think too much of it and was happy because that meant more privacy for our crew. Things started out small, nothing that I would think too much of. Our water filter broke immediately, and if you've ever had to drink boiled water from a tiny stream where cows shit, it does not take out the taste. When we returned with the next project with a brand new water filter, it also immediately broke again. Things would continue to get weird, but not in a way that I would think much of. First, tools are being moved around the camp. These tools, especially rock bars, are super expensive, but not only that, they're extremely heavy, the lightest around 40 pounds, and sometimes we would have them moved around the camp. My crew leader was annoyed because he thought we were being irresponsible, as these were expensive tools that needed to be put in the same spot in camp. Didn't think much of that either. Then the weird noises at night started. You hear many weird noises in the woods. When you spend a significant amount of time in the woods, you become accustomed to the sounds of trees falling, coyotes crying, cows in the meadows, and animals walking around. Then, one night, the sounds began. I can only describe it as a metallic banging sound. The night they began, I stuck my head out of my tent and shouted to my crew leader that a bear might be in the bear bins. We had those super large metal bear bins with the screws on top, and when I first started hearing the noises, that was the only thing I could think of that it could be. The crew leader ran down to our kitchen and saw nothing. The girl who was camped next to the kitchen said the bear bins were untouched, but she heard the noises too. Then finally one night something happened that to this day I still can't believe actually happened. I gaslight myself with this story because I couldn't believe my own eyes. We would all chat after dinner and go to sleep pretty early. When dusk would begin, we would all go back to our tents. We were close to each other, but the tents still had a solid distance between them for privacy. My crew leader's tent was near mine, and we would usually walk back to our tents together. We had walked this path many times, as we had been on this project for a while now. There was a huge down tree in the path, so large you couldn't just step over it. Had to sit on it to get over it. We were walking back, and it was just about dusk, when it's almost dark but not quite, still not using a headlamp. He lets me go first over the tree. I step down and look up, and what I see horrifies me so much I get goosebumps everywhere, even on my face. A woman, she's covered in a white-looking sheet, she's crouched on the ground, like someone praying in a church, and the sheet is covering her entire body. I only could see her side profile. I immediately freeze. Only time I've ever been truly paralyzed with fear. My crew leader doesn't realize until he gets over the log and looks at where I'm looking, and all of a sudden he is frozen too. In the time that has elapsed, it's now fully dark outside. I don't know how much time elapsed, it felt like each second was an hour, but after a couple of seconds I asked him, "What do you see, RN?" And he describes seeing the woman, and while he is talking, he turns his headlight on, and we see her clearly. This terrified us even more, as we thought our eyes were just playing tricks on us because of the dusk. I don't know how much time passed at that point, maybe 30 seconds, and I said, "Turn it off, I'm scared." He turned off the headlamp and back on pretty quickly, and the woman was gone. I asked to sleep in his tent that night because I was so terrified. We didn't talk about it at all, just went to bed and tried to act like it didn't happen and we just imagined it. Thankfully that was the last project there, or I wouldn't have gone back. When we were packing up to go, I had my feet out of the tent packing up, and something growled at me on the left side of my tent where I couldn't see. I screamed, and my crew leader came running. Ranchers a lot of the time come get their cattle, and they have a bunch of cattle dogs with them, so I thought it might have been one of the dogs. My crew leader runs up and asks what happened. I ask if he saw a dog next to my tent. He said he saw nothing. I tried to erase all this scariness from my mind, as I had had a wonderful summer in the Sierras with wonderful people and had a great time. When I got back to civilization, I opened up my diary to look up some things. When you spend extended amounts of time without a cell phone, there are so many things you think of and talk about in conversation that you can't look up, so you write them down. I was looking at my list of things to look up, and I had become intrigued with the Native Americans that lived in the meadows we were at because we had seen some petroglyphs. I was doing my master's in American Studies at the time, and that was super up my alley. So I started doing a little research. That somehow led me to a website. As I started to read, I got scared all over again and read about how people in the exact meadows that I had been gallivanting around are the place where many other people have also seen this woman and metal banging sounds. The Forest Service is refusing to camp there or visit there. Turns out the campsite we were at was the haunted Lewis Stringer site that everyone there talked about. I sat there horrified as I was reading it because at that point I had convinced myself that it didn't happen and I was seeing things. I would love to go back one day and see the meadow and spillway structures my crew built there, but I am overall too scared. I don't recommend that anyone stay or camp in this area. Backwoods camping trip gone wrong. From 2013 to 2019, I worked in outdoor education at many different summer camps and outdoor education centers in Canada, mostly Ontario, but I did spend a season in the Rocky Mountains. Having grown up going to sleepaway camp and eventually participating in month-long leadership programs with backcountry canoeing components, I was well prepared to lead a group of teen girls from a camp in Georgian Bay on a 2-week camping trip in the Temagami region during my first year as a counselor. The Temagami region is located between North Bay, Sudbury, and Timmins, Ontario. This region is home to many provincial parks, wonderful hiking and canoeing routes, and the Bear Island Indian Reserve. Our route was fairly typical, beginning in the Whitefish Falls region and ending at Highway 11 after 14 days of paddling, portaging, hiking, and campfire making. We had a satellite phone to check in with our camp director every day, and in case of an emergency, we also had multiple exit points along the route. Until our second to last night, we were having fun and a relatively uneventful time, besides some mild dehydration and the usual bumps and bruises. Near the end of our trip, we were doing some free camping on the shore of an uninhabited island in Bear Lake that is recognized as part of the Bear Island Indian Reserve. It's a beautiful area, and we were across from the main island that the majority of the 250-person population inhabits. We had put out the fire and gone to bed when, about an hour after falling asleep, I was jarred awake by the sound of a loud motorboat. Obviously this isn't that weird because it's a large lake and many people use boats to reach the mainland or their homes on secluded islands. However, it was around 11 p.m., and things had been quiet for the last few hours. The motor could cut out, and I could clearly hear the sounds of an argument. It sounded like at least one man and a woman, and they were very angry and yelling at each other, although I couldn't hear anything specific because they were too far offshore. Suddenly, the woman screamed, and I heard a splash into the water, and then complete silence. At this point, I was pretty freaked out and hoping to God that my girls hadn't woken up. But I wasn't that lucky because I could immediately hear talking from their tent and could tell they were scared. I was about to unzip my door and look out to see if maybe the boaters had had an accident or something when my whole tent lit up. The light slowly panned across me and onto the tent my girls were in, that immediately made them quiet. In a normal volume, I was able to ask them to stay absolutely still. The light panned back to my tent and then over to theirs again. I can only guess that it must have been some sort of boat with a searchlight on it. If anyone has any ideas of what that type of boat could be, let me know. After an eternity that was really only about 5 minutes, the light was turned off, and I heard the motor engage and fade as the boat drove away from us. I immediately found the satellite phone and called our camp director, who gave us the phone number for the local police. I called them, and they said they would forward the information I gave to the local native detachment on Bear Island. I don't think any of us slept that night, and I got up at 5 a.m. to take my canoe out and take a look around. I thought maybe someone had fallen overboard and had managed to swim to shore. Obviously I didn't find anyone, and there was nothing floating in the water either, although it is a pretty deep body of water. None of us wanted to camp one more night, so I called the camp and had them head out to the pickup point a day early. We paddled like hell and didn't really talk much. I think none of us really wanted to speculate about what we might have heard and what would have happened if we'd made noise or moved when that light was on our tents. I've thought about this a lot over the years, but whenever I've told people the story, they've been quite skeptical. I recently started looking into missing person cases in the area but without much luck. If anyone listening to this is familiar with Indigenous issues in Canada, though, there is an epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and these cases usually go unreported or unsolved. Strange beeping noise outside the tent and footsteps. A few years ago, my sister and I were both home in our hometown in rural western Colorado due to the pandemic. We decided to go camping in Rubido Canyon one night, and we backpacked in several miles, so this is the absolute middle of nowhere. There was absolutely nothing around us. And not even a known place to hike/camp. We were sitting around the fire once it started getting dark, and I started to feel really uneasy. We noticed that my dog was on high alert, his hair standing up on his back. Then we started to hear what sounded kind of like a beeping noise periodically. It didn't sound at all like a human or animal. Then we heard what sounded like footsteps/twigs breaking coming toward us but stopping right at the edge of where the firelight reached. I'm not even sure footsteps is the right way to describe it, kind of like something just rushing right to the edge of the light. It was a really dark night, and nothing was visible beyond that. It happened again, so we immediately got into the tent together with my dog too, who was acting really alert, listening, and staying completely still with his hair still raised. He is a big shepherd/chow mix, and usually, he will growl or bark or chase when an animal or something is around, but this time he was just very still, listening. The beeping and rushing steps kept happening, and I did not sleep at all that night. From all different directions. We were basically both frozen in terror. All I had was a small knife, and I just clutched it, lying frozen. I had to pee so bad but absolutely could not leave the tent. As soon as daylight came, we got out of there as fast as possible, without saying a word. My heart is racing even recalling this night. I have no idea how to explain it. Any thoughts? Similar experiences? I joined here to share some of my experiences. I have had my share. The most recent event occurred in September of last year. It was the opening day of bow season, and although I had not done any scouting, I had hunted in the area during the previous 2 seasons. The only difference is that this year the land was leased to game and fish, and they closed the roads, providing a longer hike than normal. This year, I had my girlfriend with me, which presented both a blessing and a challenge. So 30 minutes into the hike, we reached the spot where my girlfriend wants to hunt, carrying bows in hand and climbers on our backs in the pristine 90-degree weather. After positioning her climber on the tree and getting her situated, I walked back towards the truck, covering 300 yards before veering off to a creek that was brimming with signs last year. As I enter the area, I notice that it's not as dense as I would have liked, and there are no signs or acorns yet. However, I am committed to this location, and I don't have the luxury of changing my plans as it will be dark in a few hours. I reach the top of the tree, then have to descend again, adjust, stand, and climb back up, all while sweating profusely and cursing myself for venturing out so early in the heat. Then I find I have forgotten my thermocell, so I am being eaten alive by skeeters the size of crows. There is zero phone service here and no way to communicate. In my years hunting there, I have it to myself with a bow and muzzleloader and rarely see anyone. If I do it, it is only on the main road. About an hour before dark, I start to hear a noise but don't pay any mind to fighting skeeters. Well, after 5 minutes of the noise, I finally start listening. I think it is a cow bellowing. Nope. Maybe an owl? Nope. Couple hounds, that has to be it. Nope. After another 10 minutes of this terrible, long drawn-out moaning coming from the ridges across the road in the direction of the truck, I decide I will not be there when whatever it is gets there. I climb down the tree, quickly pack up, and make it back to the road. I drop the stand and slip up to the GF, scaring her to death because I was so stealthy. Maybe she is deaf, Ike. Her next question, knowing how dedicated I am and that I always sit until I can't see the ground, was "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "I'm hot, sweating to death, and fighting skeeters. I am ready to go. Also, I am not going to be here when whatever is making that moaning noise gets here." She says she hasn't heard it. As she descends and we begin to pack up, the situation becomes more routine. She said something semicircled her in the thicket she couldn't see. And said it smelled like musky wet dog/dog poo. I said, "Probably bear." At this point the sun has gone down and light is fading. I can see the truck, and my stand clanks in my ear at every step. I thought I heard a strange noise but was unsure with the stand clanking. Then, between clanks, I heard it. Whoop. Whoop. It does 2 sets, with 2 whoops. I said, "WTF is that?" We listen to it again, and it sounds like it's just past the truck across the road. I can't see into the main road because of the thick growth of briar and honeysuckle growing up the select cut pines. I set my stand down as quietly as possible at the truck and tell her to stay there. I draw my G19, wishing I had brought the G20 instead, and peek into the main road, expecting to see a man calling his dogs. Nothing. There was silence, no wind, and nothing else could be heard. No new tire tracks and the powder dust crossing my tracks from coming in. We load up and head home, exchanging stories about the experience. I get home, and at this point I have over 27 years in the woods and have never heard this sound. I had dismissed the moaning as unimportant, but couldn't get over the strange whoops. I start searching for various owls and birds native to this area, but I find nothing. I start playing Sasquatch vocal recordings. Nope, then bam. Hair standing up, chill down spine. The Ohio howls. Exact match to what I heard. I heard it for over 10 minutes. Then after more nopes. The Sierra sounds. Exact match to the whoops heard. It scared my girlfriend to death. She would not hunt there with me again until gun season came. I have never felt comfortable on this particular mountain, but I push on to have a chance at the big bucks there. The previous year I got out by myself for an evening hunt and started up the same road. I begin to sense that someone is watching me, and I persist until I experience an overwhelming sense of unwelcomeness that evening. I hightailed it out. I have a good amount of Comanche in me, and my buddy is mostly Crow and Blackfeet. He hates hunting that area and basically refuses to do so unless he is within sight of me. Said it just gives him the woolies. That's not my friend in the woods. I grew up out in the wooded country in Illinois, on a short dead-end street 10 plus miles from a town, and there were 7 houses in the area spread out on 2.5-acre wooded lots or larger each. There were no large wild animals, there aren't bears or similarly large animals in the region, and people rarely wandered there or got lost. In fact, during the 20 years I lived there, neither lost people nor large animals were ever seen wandering around. So please keep that in mind. When I was a young girl in my early teens, I had a good guy friend a few years older than me who lived next door, Terry. Terry was allowed to go out with his friends much later than I was, and he would sometimes tromp over to my yard after getting home late and throw rocks from the gravel area outside at my window to chat. My bed was right next to the window. I'd open the window, and we'd whisper stories and generally talk for a bit. My second-story window faced our backyard, and his house was to the side. I could see his house from my window over the shrub trees and walking path to his driveway. I'd often know if he was out, the light was on over the side door entrance, or already home, the light was off. One time during the summer when my window was open, I heard a car in his driveway dropping him off. I was probably 14 years old, and it was around midnight. I heard Terry get out of a car and talk to his friends. Soon his friends pulled away. I softly called out, as loud as I could without waking my parents, asking Terry to stop by and chat. He didn't respond, as he probably didn't hear me. Then I came up with the not-so-brilliant idea to sneak outside and scare him. I'd spent many years in the woods learning how to blend in and be silent. As kids, we'd often sneak around and scare each other. So I silently sneaked down from the second floor and out my back garage door, which led to our backyard below my window, which led to Terry's house off the side through our gravel area, then through a well-worn path through the woods about 25 feet long. My parents had put in a gravel pit around the back of the house, probably because nothing much grew due to the shade of the oak trees. There were 14-inch oak rounds set out as an uneven stepping path in the gravel, and if you stepped off of the rounds, the crunch of gravel/rocks would give you away. I picked my way expertly and silently across the log rounds facing Terry's house. My eyes got accustomed to the dark, and I didn't see him. Also at that time I heard the door of his house close and the light going off, signaling he went in, likely to bed. I waited for at that moment. I thought I saw something moving in the woods between our houses, but it wasn't on the path we usually used. The path has thorny wild rose and raspberry plants that can hurt if you aren't careful. So I thought it was odd that he'd be in the woods, but maybe he wanted to scare me like I was plotting to do to him. But I saw something human-sized and dark moving through the woods slowly and pausing every once in a while, like me. It was coming closer, and I definitely saw it, but it was strange in that it wasn't walking directly to my window to talk. Therefore I hunched down and waited in silence, wondering if I could still startle him. I still thought it was Terry, and he saw me sneak out, and he was trying to scare me. I watched a dark outline of a human figure moving, but then I would lose sight of it in the foliage. It seemed to be stalking slowly and listening/checking every few feet while hiding. After losing patience, I whispered to Terry one last time, but he didn't respond. I got bored of hiding and crouching, so I quietly tippy-toed back to my garage door and went back inside, silently locking up as I went. I snuck back upstairs to my room above the area where I was just standing/crouching. My window was open, and I definitely heard someone/something walking around the yard. I whispered again for Terry out my window but got no answer. Then I heard someone/something fall and grunt/moan pretty loudly in the window well right below my window. It wasn't enough to wake my parents, but it was definitely loud enough that I didn't mistake it, and it sent a shock of fear through me. If you aren't familiar with a window well, it's a semicircle hole connected to the house, dug out about 3 or 4 feet deep and reinforced with metal. It allows a basement window to be put in below ground level, and the hole lets some natural light in. There's absolutely no way Terry could have fallen into our window well. He had been playing hide and seek and many outdoor games for years since we were young around the whole neighborhood. We were intimately familiar with everyone's window wells and house footprints, as well as the paths in the woods. The grunt sounded humanish and not like an animal. It also pulled itself out quietly without a lot of thrashing. That's when I realized this wasn't a fun game and someone/something was out there, and it wasn't Terry. I tried to look outside my window as best I could, but there was a screen on my windows to keep the bugs out, so I couldn't lean my head out the window to see next to the wall of our house directly below me. I then heard the crunch of rocks as whatever it was stepped in the noisy gravel. Again, Terry would know where the log rounds were and would not step in the gravel. He knew my parents were pretty strict, and he was as good at being quiet as I was. Whatever it was stopped, and I held my breath. I pretty much sat there with my face pressed against the screen 2 stories up for probably a half hour. It seemed like an hour, but I'm sure I didn't have the patience back then to wait that long. I never heard it /him/her leave, but I grew tired and eventually fell asleep on my bed that was next to the window. Back in the summer of 2020, I was traveling with my partner to Boise, Idaho, from Colorado to visit his family and stay for a camping trip. This trek is nearly 15 hours long, and while you can do it in a day, it's better if you stop to rest. Having lived in Utah at one point, I was very eager to show him the natural hot springs in Spanish Fork. They are located deep in Diamond Fork Canyon and require a 45-minute hike from the parking lot. Still, we were both excited to get out and moving after 7 hours in the car. When we arrived at the first parking lot, however, the gate was shut and locked tight. A sign taped to the metal read closed. There is absolutely no access to the hot springs. The fines were set at a maximum of $2,000. We were bummed. COVID had shut down many things, and we figured that this was outside, so there's no way it was going to be closed. After some research on the government website, we discovered that a body had possibly been found in the springs and was likely the cause for the locked gate. Sad and tired of sitting in the car, we drove back down the canyon road to find a spot to camp for the night. Most of the more established campsites were closed due to COVID or were already taken for the night. This was fine since we prefer more dispersed camping anyway. As we neared the exit of the canyon, we randomly selected a road to turn on. Road 338. Most of the road was a well-kept dirt road. Near a creek, we came across some promising spots where 2 or 3 other people had already set up camp for the night. We wanted to explore further to see if there was anything that truly stood out. Sounds funny, but some sites give off that this is the one. Feeling. Finally, we came to a dead end in the main road with a fire mitigation road to the right. At this very spot there was a strange boulder with some type of inscription on it, partially surrounded by a wooden fence. I had to investigate. The inscription read, Diamond Battle, June 20, 1866. No way. This is a memorial for a battle that took place right here. A feeling of uneasiness and, oddly, respect washed over me. After traveling up the fire road and not finding what we were hoping for in a campsite, we decided to pick a spot by the small creek we passed on the way in. It was getting dark quickly, but we set up our tent in no time at all and got a fire going. The creek was loud but peaceful. Though, ever since I read that inscription, I couldn't shake this strange feeling. I'm not a paranoid person, but I kept feeling on the edge of my seat. Like something was watching us from the woods just across the water. As the night grew darker, this feeling grew stronger. I decided I would rather not be in the open anymore and retreated to the tent to get some rest while my partner stayed up to enjoy the fire. I snuggled into our sleeping bag and exhaled comfortably, listening to the creek that was now much quieter and a bit further away from the tent. I started to drift off when I heard it. Soft chanting. Rhythmic drums. My eyes shot open. Was I really hearing that? I strained my ears to listen over the running water. I couldn't quite get a clear sound, but it was definitely there. This is when I noticed the ground was also rumbling. It felt as though horses were galloping down the road, just 100 feet away from our campsite. I was unsure if I should tell my partner, but I felt that saying it would make it true and summon an army of spirits from the trees to our campsite. Before I could make a decision, I fell asleep. This was somehow the most peaceful slumber I have ever had. The next morning, we packed up our tent and left no trace that we had ever spent the night by Little Diamond Creek. When I finally regained cell service, I did a Google search of that memorial in Diamond Fork, Utah. It turns out there was a battle there between the Utes and the Mormon militia, and lives were lost on that mountainside. After reading this, I decided to tell my partner what I heard last night before falling asleep. I told him about the chanting, the drumming, and even the stomping of the horses. He looked at me in disbelief and said he heard the exact same thing. I estimate that I had only been in the tent for 10 minutes when he became frightened, standing alone by the fire and listening to the distant chanting and drumming. He came into the tent and experienced that same peaceful sleep I had. I had the impression that the Native Americans who lost their lives there were watching over us. There seemed to be a strong yet calm and protective presence hovering over us. If you're ever on Diamond Fork Road, I hope you visit and pay respects to the Diamond Battle Memorial, and maybe the spirits of the land will watch over you too. Bare footprints in the ice. I will keep this brief and concise. A few years back, we were having a brutally cold winter. The snow had frozen into ice and covered everything. When I went to let my dog out one last time before bed that evening, the backyard was completely dark. As we exited the house from the sliding door of the walkout basement and onto the lower deck, I felt that something was off. Our house backs up to some woods, so I was accustomed to hearing noises from wildlife in the night. This night was different. Nothing made a sound except the Arctic cold wind, but I had the feeling I was being watched. The entire time my dog was in the backyard, I looked around nervously, expecting a coyote or other predator to pop out of the tree line. My dog did his business, but afterwards stopped and stared at a corner of the woods until I got creeped out and called him back inside. I quickly locked the sliding door and shut the curtains, unable to shake the uneasy feeling I had outside. After double and triple checking all the locks in the house, I went to bed. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I hear the muffled sound of my dog barking from the basement 2 floors below. I got up, stumbled down 3 flights of stairs, and found him standing at the basement sliding door. He was peeking through the closed curtains, barking his head off with the hairs standing up all along his back. I tried calling him away from the door, but he wouldn't let up. I dreaded peeking out the curtain to see what he was barking at because of the uneasy feeling I had earlier in the night. At last, I inhaled deeply and gently moved the curtain away. I peered into the inky blackness but saw nothing to cause any alarm. A wave of relief washed over me. I figured it must have been a deer or raccoon in the yard that set him off. He whined at the door for a few more minutes until I bribed him upstairs with a dog cookie. I went back to bed and wasn't disturbed again. However, in the morning, I went to the basement to let out the dog. I opened the sliding door and walked out onto the deck as he bounded into the snow. My blood ran as cold as the sub-zero morning temperatures when I looked down. There, frozen into the ice on the deck, was a set of bare human footprints. They were obvious. I could make out each toe on the person's foot. The prints were large and appeared to be from an adult male. Looking around, I noticed they started at the base of the deck, went to the sliding door and the window of the basement living room, and then seemed to disappear off the side of the deck. I had my snow boots on, so I walked around the yard, but I could find no trace of the footprints in the snow once they left the deck. Keep in mind the daily temperatures that winter barely made it above 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind chill made it feel close to 20 below. Frostbite would set in within a matter of minutes for anyone walking around barefoot, especially in the dead of night. I never experienced anything like that again, but I did adopt a second dog shortly thereafter. When I was 13, 14, I and my friends would sneak out and go hang out with our boyfriends out in the middle of nowhere. We lived basically in the middle of nowhere, so going to random backroads was pretty much our only option for having fun. We would go to this place called the Tunnel by the locals. It was just a dirt road with tall trees and overgrown willows on both sides. It was very secluded, so we would go there to drink beer, smoke weed, and make out with our boyfriends. They would always tell us spooky stories of a large black dog that would chase their car every time they went down there at night. They said one time they went there during the day and saw the dog dead and mangled on the side of the road. The next time they went back at night, the black dog was alive and well and chasing after their car again. I knew they were just telling us these stories to scare us, and I wasn't sure if I really believed them, since I had come down to this place with them a few times and I had never seen the black dog. One night around 1 or 2 in the morning, we were sitting in our friend's car in the tunnel. We had all been drinking and smoking weed. We were all joking and laughing when suddenly the driver whispered, "What is that up there?" I looked and didn't see anything, so I replied, "There's nothing up there, your eyes are playing tricks on you." "No, seriously, there's something in the road up there," he replies. The guy sitting in the passenger seat agrees and says he sees something too. The driver puts the car in drive and starts slowly rolling forward, and a figure emerges from the dark. A man in shorts is standing in the middle of the road watching us drive towards him. This is a dirt road, in the middle of nowhere, at 2 in the morning on a very cold fall night, and this man is standing in the road wearing nothing but shorts. He is not even wearing shoes. Just shorts. What the duck is he doing? The driver says as he pushes on the brakes and stops the car. We all stare for a moment at this man just staring at us. His eyes were glowing, like a deer's eyes do in headlights. I've never seen a person's eyes glow like that before. We all start freaking out, and then the driver says, "Duck this," and starts driving forward. Fast. The man just keeps staring at us until we get about 10 feet away, and then he just calmly walks to the side of the road and vanishes. There was nowhere for him to go. There were 6-foot fences with willows overgrown over them, making the barrier at least 10 feet tall. No human man could have cleared all of that. I still can't explain it to this day. A friend's uncle told me this story. It supposedly happened to him and another guy in the late 70s and early 80s. The story is quite unusual and intriguing. Okay, so, minimal backstory first. My friend's Uncle Bob and his two friends leased some land in southern Alabama to hunt deer. According to Bob, it was around 900 acres altogether, so they had a good bit of land to wander around on between three people. They used an old, pre-existing house as a camp, and the property featured old roads running through it, a few old home sites with chimneys still intact, and a small graveyard. The two stories I can remember, it's been a long time since I've heard them, only concern Bob and his friend Joe, so we'll leave the other guy out now. Anyway, on to the stories. This story is brief and somewhat unsettling, especially when you imagine yourself in it. Joe had gone into the woods before daylight and climbed into his tree stand. He was just sitting up there and waiting with just enough light out to see 50 or so yards ahead of him when he caught movement out of the corner of his eye. He turns his gaze to see one of the old roadbeds through the trees, and he swears he sees an old woman, dressed in a thin house dress, walking slowly down the road. Joe said he sat there for a second, not believing what he was seeing. There were no houses close by, and none of the roads connected to outside the property. Also, it was freezing and just barely daylight. Then he decided, despite the fact he was suddenly overcome with dread and fear, that's the way he put it to Bob, apparently, dread, like it hit him out of nowhere, that he had to go help this old woman. He climbed down and ran over to where he'd just seen her walking, and, nothing. She was gone without a trace, and Joe decided not to hunt that spot anymore. The second story is weirder. Bob was at the house alone. His friends were on their way but not expected for another few hours. Bob was sitting in the kitchen around 9 o'clock at night, drinking coffee, when he heard pounding on the front door and a woman screaming, "Help me, let me in." Bob ran to the door and opened it, and the woman bolted in screaming, "Lock the door, they're after me and want to kill me." Bob locked the door and looked outside but couldn't see anything, so he took the woman to the kitchen, gave her some coffee to drink, and tried to get the story. The woman said her name was Mary and that she had been walking home and was pulled into a truck with two men who had taken her down a back road, hit her, and threatened her. Her exact words were, "I escaped somehow and ran in the woods until they brought me here." After telling Bob all the above, she went silent, just staring down at her coffee and not responding to anything Bob said. Bob was worried about the guys following him and had no phone out there, but he had a rifle and a pistol and kept checking outside but never heard anything. He sat at the table with the woman, who remained unresponsive, and smoked cigarettes and drank coffee for a couple of hours. He said she just stared at her cup with a blank expression the whole time. After the initial shock had worn off, Bob said he noticed that her clothes were odd. They looked like something from the 50s, but he couldn't get her to say anything. Finally he saw headlights outside. He ran to the front door and looked out, and it was his friends, so he opened the door to go and tell them about the situation inside. When they all went in, she was gone, only her coffee cup sitting at the table. According to Bob, there was no other way out of the cabin except the front door, and nobody had seen her come out. They called for her and looked around but never saw her again. Bob, of course, called the police the next day, but he never heard anything else about it. He personally thought that she was the ghost of a woman that had all of those things done to her but hadn't escaped and was for some reason drawn to the cabin. He said lots of weird things happened on that property. These are just the only two stories I can remember. Family cabin. Here's something that happened last weekend while my family and I were at the family cabin. My wife woke me up around 1:30 a.m. yelling at me because she thought I was passing gas. I woke up and smelled one of the worst odors I have ever smelled in my life. It was a mix of diarrhea, sulfur, and body odor. I immediately told her it wasn't me and that the smell was coming from outside of the cabin. I had the window open with a fan blowing on me. I'm a hot sleeper. I turned the fan off, closed the window, and the smell started to go away. My wife asked what it was, and I told her I didn't know. I went back to sleep and woke up around 7:30 a.m. My kids were already awake and eating breakfast at the table. My son said he didn't sleep well the night before because he felt like something kept looking at him through the living room window. At one point, he reported feeling a sense of being watched, glanced towards the window, and was certain he saw a face or head move out of the way. He was sleeping right next to the window on the couch. Thereafter, he moved over to the futon where my daughters were sleeping and fell back asleep. I then told my kids about the smell my wife and I experienced. My kids asked what it could be. I told them I didn't really know, but the person or thing would have to be at least 8 tall to be able to look out the window. Either that or someone was on a ladder. I assumed it could have been a Bigfoot because of reports I have read about them being really smelly at times and because of their interest in children. I stepped outside ahead of everyone else, examining the ground for prints, but found nothing unusual. One kind of weird thing is that, during the entire night, my Malinois never made a sound. She was sleeping in her kennel in the kitchen, but usually she'll still bark if something is around. Not sure if this story qualifies as creepy, but it was a weird experience nonetheless. The Bayou Witch. To the south and west of Houston, there are drainage bayous crisscrossing all through the countryside that serve as runoff for subdivisions and businesses. Perhaps the most famous is Buffalo Bayou, which runs through the heart of Houston to the Gulf of Mexico. It begins, however, west of Houston and starts ramping up its size in Katy. Anyway, I spend a lot of miles on my mountain bike riding the banks of these bayous, and surprisingly, there are some remote areas. By remote I mean maybe a couple of miles of swampy, dense wood and flowing water between you and a structure. On this ride, it was hot, maybe 95 degrees and humid, and I was trying and failing to acclimate myself to the hellish summers we have here. I was utterly exhausted as I crawled along a single track on the bank of a bayou that intersects with Buffalo Bayou. If you know the area, it is the main bayou out of Cinco Ranch that passes under Highway 99, and when this story happened, the trail was only paved to maybe Fry Road. I rounded an easy bend and noticed a lone figure hiking the trail, heading my direction. It wasn't unusual to see someone on foot that far out, but not altogether common either. As I approached, the figure was striking in appearance and did not appear to notice that I was on a collision course. I drifted into the grass off the trail to give the person space and got a good look at them as I pedaled by. It was a very old woman wearing something like Gandalf the White in Lord of the Rings and carrying a long walking stick that looked to be handcrafted from a tree branch. She was old, and I mean very old, like age spots, deep wrinkles, and stark white hair. She did not acknowledge me in any way as I passed by. In my befuddled stupor, I kept pedaling for maybe 100 to 200 more yards and rounded another bend before my brain kicked in the logic that this person had no business being out here, this far down the bayou, in this heat, and at that age. My grandfather had passed away from Alzheimer's that year, and I finally put the two together that she could be lost. I hammered the brakes, whipped around, and pumped the pedals back to check up on her. In less than a minute, I turned the corner to where I had last seen her, only to find her gone. I rode for at least another mile at a full clip, and no figure appeared. I turned around to check again, to see if maybe she had fallen in the bayou or perhaps taken a side trail I had not seen. As I sluggishly retraced my steps, my gaze searched left and right, but to no avail. There were no trails, and the woods are ridiculously thick, dense, teeming with insects, and mired in brackish puddles that you could not pay me to walk or wade through, having seen an alligator there on several occasions. I mean, this stuff is seriously mean bush. On the other side, the bayou was at least 20 feet wide of flowing water and muddy nastiness that, again, I had seen gators in, so there was no going in there either. I never saw her again. Where could she have gone? Why was she out there? Why was she dressed like that? All unanswered questions. In 2009, my family went out to get a Christmas tree. We were about 20 to 30 miles away from home, way out in the middle of nowhere. This road we were on is fairly regularly traveled by people with jeeps and such because the mud is really soft, even when there is snow. Something to do with the chemical makeup of the rock, or something. That's important. So anyway, this road is on top of a ridge when we find a suitable tree and stop to cut it. Recently, we had watched a documentary on Bigfoot that had kind of freaked my siblings and me out, so my younger brother keeps asking if Sasquatch is in this part of the forest. We keep telling him that Sasquatch isn't real and not to worry, but his insistence is starting to creep my sister and me out. We got the tree on the ground, pictures taken, and my dad is cleaning up some branches from the bottom when my mom gets the great idea to throw a rock into the woods right next to the car. For those that don't know, this is common Sasquatch behavior, so my brother is really getting worried. After several rocks, my mom was done throwing things when, out of nowhere, a decent-sized tree branch landed on the roof of the car. This branch was bigger around than our tree, which was a problem because our tree was among the biggest and tallest in that area. At the time I brushed it off as my dad being silly, since I didn't hear him sawing anymore. We pulled the branch off the car, and I went to take a leak while my dad tied everything down. I walked down the hill about 10 feet until I found a suitable bush, but on the way down, something got spooked from around that spot and took off to my right. I figured I'd come across a deer or something, so I went down to where it had been to look for tracks so I could identify the animal. I got down there and couldn't find much except some trampled grass and broken branches where the animal had busted through the underbrush. The grass was pretty thick, so I wasn't too upset by not being able to find anything. I returned to my chosen bush, did my thing, but as I was trying to climb back up the side where I had come down, I slipped because of the mud. I'm used to that happening, as it is a common phenomenon around here, but I was slightly miffed at having to walk along the side of this ridge on the north face in December. It was about 20 degrees, threatening snow, and about a 15-mile-an-hour wind. I'd left my coat up top, Since I hadn't expected to be down there that long, the mountain blocked the wind so that on top it was closer to 45 degrees. As I'm walking along the side of this hill to where it got a little brushier, my mom yelled down, "Quit throwing rocks. You've hit my window twice." I yelled back that I wasn't throwing any rock and kept going, thinking that my sister was just being silly and carrying on with the Bigfoot thing. As I was reaching the patch of brush that I was going to climb, I came across what looked like a human footprint, but without shoes in the mud. It was about 14 inches long and had hair imprinted in it. At first I thought it was a bear, but the bears around here don't get much more than 150 to 200 pounds, and even a big one only has 7-inch feet. As I was examining this track, I heard something fly over me. I looked up in time to see a branch landing at the top of the hill, which is only a little way up now. I then looked in the direction it came from just as something was retreating down the hill in the brush. I never saw it, but it was big, and I made a new world record for highest standing jump because I made it to the top of that hill in picoseconds. I got back to the car totally out of breath despite it only being 20 yards, and hopped in. My dad was just getting in as I ran up, and everyone else was already up. They asked me what was wrong, and I said, "I don't know, but something down there is throwing things at us. Let's go." My parents exchanged glances, and my father, who always believes in finding a real explanation, didn't hesitate to leave. This is what made me a believer in Sasquatch. About 2 miles down this road, we were traveling at about 25 miles per hour when this truck suddenly came flying up behind us and refused to back off. We pulled over in a wide spot, but instead of passing, the truck pulled next to us, and that driver rolled down the window. It turned out to be somebody we knew, who was a logger from the time he was 15. He spent his whole life in the woods and always denied the existence of a Bigfoot. But when he stopped next to us, he was terrified, and he said, "Get your ass in gear and scoot. I just saw a Bigfoot." We followed him to the main road, where we stopped and asked him where he'd seen this Bigfoot. He said that someone had been cutting up a tree there, probably for Christmas, and that the thing had been standing on the side of the road. Former park ranger. A few years ago my friend Tez and I set out on the Great American Road Trip. We were going to drive from New York to Los Angeles, zigzagging through the country for 6 weeks. We were both in our early 20s and pretty broke, and as my mom had been a long-haul trucker, I suggested that to save a ton of money, we should sleep in the back of our hatchback. It was a pretty cozy setup. We bought some blankets and sheets at Goodwill and cut one of them up to make curtains. By the end of the first week, we'd gotten so we could set up camp in about 10 minutes, luggage moved to the front, curtains up, bedding laid down, and out for the night. We slept in parking lots, free campsites, rest areas, and basically anywhere it seemed safe and semi-legal. There was never a night, after the first night, where we felt scared, until the last week of the trip, in Arizona. We were near Flagstaff and had gotten pretty used to our routine. We didn't go on a set schedule and would never drive more than 3 or 4 hours a day. With no destination really in mind, outside a few must-see landmarks, we'd drive to places we found the night before on Google and take suggestions from other campers, locals, and people we met. We'd also gotten very good at making friends. We went to Denny's with a group of rednecks we met at a campsite in the back of their pickup, because I got hungry and overheard them saying they were going to go. We met an 80-year-old cowboy who took us out drinking and taught us to line dance at a country bar. Hope you're still kicking. Grandpa Mac played the guitar with some musicians in the middle of a thunderstorm, got fed breakfast and dinner by tons of campers who invited us to hang out with them, and spent the 4th of July with a family who basically adopted us into their campsite. Grandma gave us some weed candy. Basically every encounter we had with a stranger was positive. This night didn't look to be any different. We found a free campsite on Google and drove up into the woods, following our GPS. We were pretty far out of town, and something seemed a little bit off when we pulled up to the campsite. There was one RV parked and 2 cars further up in the trees. We pulled up near the RV, and a man opened the door. Tez waved hello, and he just stared at her. His expression was completely blank. Then, as if she hadn't said anything, he just slowly closed the door again, staring at us the entire time. Figuring he just wanted some privacy and thought we'd be obnoxious, we pulled further down the road and found a flat spot to park the car. Instead of our usual routine of setting up camp immediately while it was still light out, we goofed around for a while, smoking and laughing and taking dumb photos of ourselves. Tez pointed out a campfire further down the campsite, and we decided to go be friendly. We'd met so many cool people in the previous 5 weeks by just going up and offering beer or chatting, so we wandered over. Near the campfire there were 2 men, the owners of the cars we'd seen earlier. They seemed friendly, and we sat down to chat with them. They were drinking and smoking, and we sat down and had a beer with them. One of the men seemed pretty off, and we came to find out that the two of them didn't actually know one another. The older man was definitely on some sort of drugs. He was spinning in circles and talking about UFOs. However, he seemed harmless. The older gentleman left us chatting with the younger man, who claimed to be a former park ranger. He was handsome and easygoing, and we spent several hours just chatting about our trip, our families, and everything else. Then he started talking about the bear. He'd seen a bear earlier in the forest. Tez didn't believe him, and he pulled out his camera to show her photos of the bear. It was very close to the campsite, and we both were a little freaked out. It wasn't unheard of for one of us to get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, so the idea of a bear hanging around in the night spooked us. The ranger just laughed, and then his expression changed completely. It's hard to describe, but his voice seemed somehow cold. He said, "If you get out of your car in the middle of the night, it's not a bear you should be worried about." I kept waiting for the laugh or for him to nudge Tez with his elbow. The joke's on the foreigner and the city girl, right? He never did. I laughed awkwardly and made a dumb joke about serial killers in the woods. My friend laughed as well and joked about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We switched topics, but the ranger returned to the subject of something grabbing us from our car at night in 5 minutes. No matter how we tried to steer the conversation away from serial killers, he kept latching back on. The older man was high as a kite at this point and was staring at the stars, not talking. We'd just awkwardly laugh and sip our beer and try to get the conversation going somewhere else. Then the ranger stood up and walked towards the cooler to get another beer. At this point it's pitch black out, and I can't see anything outside the circle of light from the campfire. The beer cooler was outside of that circle. Suddenly there is a red dot in the darkness, and it took a moment for me to realize that it's a camera. The ranger is holding a camera. He had taken a photo of us. I could see the screen on the digital camera lit up. Now, it wasn't odd for the people we met to ask to take pictures with us. My friend Tez is gorgeous, with dark hair and blue eyes, like a young Megan Fox, and we were friendly. People like having pictures of themselves. It was an entirely strange thing to have this person taking a photo of us without asking or even indicating that that's what he was doing. We were both staring at him like deer in the headlights at this point, but instead of realizing what he's doing is a bit weird, he checks his camera, adjusts some things, and takes another photo. This time with the flash. No asking us to smile, no proposing a group photo, and no explanation. After this photo, he comes back to the fire and sits down. Not a word was said about the photo. At this point, I and Tez are mutually freaked out. We make some BS excuse that we need to go set up our campsite and nope the hell out. When we stand to leave, the UFO guy smiles and says to have a good night. Ranger, however, looks at us with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes and says, "Be careful out there, there's more than bears in the woods." Every hair on my body stood on end. I wasn't alone in my discomfort either because Tez laughed a response out and pulled me away from the campfire towards our car. We rush back to the car, which we only found in the dark by referencing the RV, and jump in the front seats. My friend Tez is all but hyperventilating. Why did he take pictures of us? I was shaking. I responded. I read that serial killers sometimes warn their victims. She stared at me for a second and locked the car doors. Do you think he just took victim photos of us? We both freaked out. She's in a full panic and turns the headlights on in the car. I immediately yell at her to turn them off, because now he knows exactly where our car is. God knows why, but that is the only night we'd not set up camp. We drove the car out of the campsite without tearing anything down. As we got onto the dirt road, Ranger was walking towards our car with that same cold expression. Ranger, let's not meet. Ever again. I got stalked and chased by something on a trail behind my house. So I was about a quarter of a mile deep into this trail that I go on to smoke the magic lettuce. I'm in a legal state, but anyways, right before I start my sesh, as I'm sitting down in a lawn chair I put out there, I see a giant gray thing that looks like a dog. When I saw it, it was coming out of a big tree and creeping up on me from behind. When I saw it, my body just told me to get out of there, so I started running as fast as I could, and as I was running, I could hear something breathing scratchily, almost like it had water in its lungs, and running after me. I never looked behind me, but I ran until I got into my house. This happened about 10 hours ago, and now I'm just wondering if anyone can help me figure out what that thing was. Unsettling experience in Southern California's Santa Monica Mountains. In 2018 I was a trail guide, horseback, in the Santa Monica Mountains of Southern California, just north of Malibu near the northern entry point for the Stunt Road trails. We would take the public out on horses up the fire roads and out into the park. Topanga is peaceful but strange. Off the beaten path. Cult territory. Old Topanga Canyon Road is nothing but hairpin turns, winding and weaving through the landscape with steep walls, old landslides, and very limited visibility around the turns. The road is super dangerous. There are no sidewalks and no shoulders on the mountain roads. One night around 10 p.m., I close up the barn alone and head home late after our last sunset ride. It's dark, and the mountains limit much of the moonlight. There are no traffic lights or lamps. I'm cautious driving down this road, not listening to any music until I reach the bottom and get on the highway for the rest of my commute. Despite the challenging driving conditions, I consistently drive this route every day without encountering any unusual occurrences. Except this day. As I squint through the dark to find my way home this particular night, carefully navigating the winding mountain road, I see something strange in my headlights around one of the turns. It's lying in a dirt pull-off at the foot of a huge rock face, just a few feet away from the two-lane road in the corner of a hairpin turn. I'm bleary-eyed. I've been in the sun and on my feet all day long, working with horses, lifting heavy things, and dealing with difficult people. I'm dehydrated, I'm hungry, I'm filthy and sweaty, I'm half asleep, and I have to be back early in the morning. My body is screaming at me to go home and put my feet up, and I can barely see anything through the exhaustion and the remote darkness. I blink the sand out of my eyes to get a better look. I brake hard. Whatever it is, it's black, not moving, and roughly the size of a man. It is unsettlingly still, the most stillness I've ever witnessed in anything human-shaped. I stop dead in the middle of the road and then slowly roll forward. My tires leave the asphalt and crunch onto the rocky pullout. I see that it is a human body wrapped in a comforter. I roll down my window and call out, "Hello." I wait for a response for a very long time. Nothing. My heart sinks. I turn off my car's engine so I can hear better but leave the lights on, open my door, and cautiously step out to investigate closer. "Hello," I call over my car door and the way even longer in the silence, still no response. Only the stillness of the comforter and the silence of a windless night in the canyons answer me. I squint and lean forward to get a better look, and see a pair of motionless black tennis shoes sticking out of the comforter. My face falls, and my blood runs cold. Hope and concern leave me, and fear takes over. Now confident it's actually a human and not my tired mind playing tricks on me over a pile of trash that's blown out of a truck bed, I quickly recoil. I'm all alone, in the middle of nowhere, in the vast Southern California wilderness, with a human body that I have been unlucky enough to discover. I wait. I watch closely in my headlights for any signs of life. A breath. For the wind to catch a corner of the fabric and lift it up. Nothing. Still as anything I've ever seen. I ask myself if I am prepared for the trauma of actually looking at the person to confirm that they're dead, the consequences of discovering that it is in fact a dead human body, having to call the police, make a statement, and be kept away from home in this state for hours. All I can see in this moment are more obstacles between me and a much-needed Epsom salt bath, electrolytes, dinner, and velvety black sleep. As my brain catches up to what's happening, I find enough clarity to acknowledge that, of course, it is my responsibility to report, but that I'm not going to get any closer. I am convinced enough of what I've found to call the police without inspecting closer. I duck back into my car, lock the door several times, and start the engine. With limited, spotty service, I dial 911, put my phone on speaker, and wait for the call to connect as I put on my seat belt. Ready to get away from this body as quickly as possible, I flick on my brights, turn on my turn signal, and look both ways around the dangerous blind curves in both directions, the motionless pile just in front of my car leering toward me and my peripherals. Between the body that's just a few yards away and the blind turns in both directions keeping me trapped there, I feel my body switch over to survival mode. Just as my mind begins to race towards the most likely worst scenario, I spot something in my headlights, a human hand slowly pulling back the comforter, just enough to sit halfway up. They blink at me through the glare of my brights and the rumble of my car's engine, this dead person's face just staring at me out of the dark. It was a transient, fast asleep 2 feet from the edge of the road. No supplies. No tent. There were no bags or belongings of any kind. The nearest homeless person I'd seen had been miles away. It's near a nice neighborhood where the homeless are quickly chased away but remote enough that someone who is in a hurry to get a body out of their car could have dropped it and easily dipped out with no one seeing them. I had worked it all over in my head. It made sense. It made a lot more sense than sleeping rolled up in a black comforter inches from the white shoulder line on a dangerous canyon road. Any driver who hung their turn a little wide or a car that pulled off to the side of the road to use the pullout would have run them over and probably ended them. The car is still running. I step 1 foot out and stand up to yell over my door. "Are you okay?" They squint at me through my headlights again, then make a quick move to get up. I react, ducking back into my car, mash the lock button, hang up on 911, which still hadn't connected, and take off down the mountain. They weren't dead. I did my duty, and that was all I needed to sleep that night. I was 100% confident, given the amount of noise I made and how long I waited for a response, that this person was dead, but the sound of my engine turning on combined with the bright high beams woke them up from whatever drug-induced stupor they must have been in for them to decide that was a good place to camp. LA is built differently. Men are the only frightening entities here, the ghosts and cryptids are too busy trying to make rent to bother anyone. Desperately seeking info on my friend's encounter in the deep woods while backcountry camping. My good friend recently shared her experience camping in the backcountry of Algonquin Park, Ontario, last September. She seemed genuinely freaked out while recounting the story. My friend has spent her entire life outdoors, including camping in remote areas, and she's well versed in the kinds of things you might encounter in the wild. I have no doubt that what she described is true, but I'm really curious if anyone else has had similar experiences. We can't come up with any logical explanation for what happened to her, and the few people she went camping with can't either. It was near sundown on a September evening when my friend and her brother took the canoe out on the lake to go fishing. This is Islet Lake in Algonquin Park. Clear evening, with no clouds. A short while later, she heard a crackling, sparkler-like noise from behind them pass overhead and forward into the tree line above across the lake in a straight line. She lifted her head to follow the noise overhead. She looked at her brother, who heard the same thing, but they both didn't see anything. The sound reached the tree line across the lake, then they heard a loud crashing noise, like the sound of a massive tree falling over. But didn't see anything crash or any tree falling over. After asking a few questions. It was not a drone noise. We hear those often in provincial parks, although they are banned, or outdoor areas. It was definitely a different noise. They were camping on the east side of the lake, and the noise landed on the west side of the lake. It was not a bird or insect. The noise was traveling relatively slowly. I thought it could be a meteorite, but maybe closer to the speed of a drone. They heard the noise travel in a straight line but did not see anything. The noise was unlike anything they had heard of. The noise was the height of the tree line, she estimated. Freaked out, they paddled back to their backcountry campsite on shore to meet the two other people they went camping with. When pulling the canoe on shore, they had then noticed in the tree line across the lake a few lights pulsating, in white light and in amber lights. The lights were pulsating where the noise traveled. However, the scattered lights were visible on the treeline floor, the treetops, and other areas. Too far apart for someone to be turning on and off flashlights, and the lights were pulsating in different colors of white light and amber. The two other campers came to the water's edge to see what they were doing and saw the lights as well. They were all freaked out and couldn't explain what they were seeing. They pulsated for a short while. Plus, this is deep backcountry Algonquin. A pretty remote area. They looked at their map and didn't see any campsites across the lake, only a few beside it on the same side of the lake, but not close. There were no trails anywhere nearby, nor any civilization anywhere near the other side of the lake for a long way away. Again, my friends seemed genuinely scared about their encounter. I'm very curious to know if anyone else has had or heard of similar experiences. I have to tell a couple of stories about my uncle, who has been in the woods his entire life, and the first story has several witnesses. He set off for his evening hunt behind the house on a cold November day, back when it actually got cold in Arkansas that time of year. Now, when I say behind the house there are miles of leased timber, we were all in a lease behind his home and my grandparents' home. There were 90 acres in between that we also had permission to hunt. Well, he walked further than anticipated and had a long walk home in the dark with no light, but the walking was easy as he was on a 5-foot wide bush hog lane. About halfway home in a thicket, he heard something following him. He would stop, it would stop, and this went on for a couple hundred yards. Needless to say, it was starting to get to him as his mind raced. All at once there is a terrible racket, and it is crashing through the brush right for him. As the racket nearly reaches him and slams into the lane, he fires his .30-06 from the hip, successfully catching a doe at his feet. He said he didn't know what was there, but it wasn't about to get him. The next day, he went bow hunting in the same area, where an old boarded-up farmhouse stood. He wanted to have a peek inside and went to the back, cautiously checking the floor along the way. Inside was a ladder up to a loft he wanted to go up, but he decided to see the rest of the house first. So he goes through the kitchen and into the main room. There was a hall with 2 doorways on the same side. He goes to the first and tries to look in and can't see anything. He said it was so dark if you stuck your hand in, you couldn't see it. He goes to the next doorway with the same results and decides to check the loft area. He gets almost halfway up the ladder and hears boots run through the house and slam the front door on the way out. He bailed off the ladder and out the back door. I asked him what could have happened, and all he could say was that, whatever it was, he had better be thankful it didn't grab him, or else he would have turned that place into Swiss cheese with the 9mm. The story is based on a true account of an abandoned camping trip in Appalachia. The story I'm sitting down to tell is a true one. Sam, my faithful friend, and I have personally experienced this story. I'm often reluctant to tell this story at length to most people, as the subject matter is unexplainable and rather strange. I don't want to come across as a superstitious individual. But after being guided all across the country and having extensive experience in many environments around the United States, I feel I have the authority to tell this story. Essentially, what I'm saying is that I've been around in the deep, dark hollows all across North America and never experienced something as strange as I did that night. I don't fancify my experiences in the woods, nor do I hopefully imagine there's something more to a twig breaking. As anyone who has spent a good deal of time in the woods knows, there's no reason to. Eventually you'll experience something daring or fantastic. I am a hunter first and foremost, and for a hunter, there's always an explanation, a reason for the wilderness and her inhabitants. It's how we identify patterns and exploit an animal's rhythm to make a successful hunt. As a hunter, you're a sort of woodsman detective, piecing together clues to set yourself up for success. This story remains unsolved. Let's get into it. It was early summer, and I was itching to go camping. I had recently received a new tent and was eager to use it. I called up my good buddy, Sam, and we planned out our camping adventure. We considered going up to the Grayson Highlands or even south to North Carolina. We decided it would be more fun to camp somewhere private. We chose to camp deep in the woods, far from any other people, where we could engage in bushcraft, hoot and holler, and bring a gun without fear of frightening the yuppies camping next to us. While we both lived in the woods, I definitely had access to the remotest stretch of woods between us. So we loaded up our stuff and began hiking deep into the valley below my childhood home. The hike was almost completely straight down a steep hillside, deep into a hollow that held a small patch of flat land, a floodplain area, and a creek. The small creek that ran through gave the area a beautiful ambience. Early signs of summer were visible all around, and the weather was great. We hiked until we felt the need to start gathering firewood before nightfall. Behind us was a steep hillside that rose to the west for miles. In front of us was the creek, and to the left the start of another ridge and hillside that rose high into the east and north. To our right, the valley we were in continued to go down, cutting a deep valley. And on the other side of the creek, another ridge, separated by a small stream from the ridge to the left, rose into the west and to the south. These two ridges in front of us ran for miles, and the little valley formed by the small creek split these ridges for a long way up until it hit the springhead. This detail is important for later in the story. Off to the right, further down the valley, more splits in the ridges are made by little tributaries. We started building camp by clearing the brush and leaves away and constructing a small fire pit. I placed a tarp on the ground to separate my tent from the damp earth. Remember this, the tarp extended out roughly a foot on each side of my tent. Sam had a hammock that he planned to sleep in. I've only ever camped in a hammock once, and it didn't go great. But I didn't say anything to him, thinking that maybe he would enjoy it. We gathered a hefty load of firewood, consisting of some reasonably dry stuff. It was shaping up to be a really nice camping trip. Sam and I sat around the fire and shot the shit until the sun went down. Now, one of the things Sam and I have always bonded on has been Bigfoot shows. We're both skeptics, and I would say we hold a similar or the same opinion on the subject. Our interest is less about believing in Bigfoot, but rather we just find the subject matter to be nostalgic, silly, and a fun thing to joke about. So, I brought up the idea to Sam that we begin to hunt Bigfoot. He laughed and thought it was a great idea. So we began doing the antics they do in the Finding Bigfoot TV show. We started with the classic, tree knocks. A tree knock, for those unaware, is when you use a stick to beat on a tree, making a loud knocking sound that echoes through the forest. Supposedly, Sasquatch communicate this way. We didn't think anything of it at all. As I said before, we didn't really believe it, we were just joking around. So we began by knocking on the trees and then stopping and listening for a response. After a few times of doing this, we paused, and hearing nothing, I began to think of a joke to crack and something else to do. Before I could open my mouth, we heard, clear as day, a tree knock far off somewhere on the ridge to the left. I looked at Sam and said, "Dude." Sam just looked back at me in surprise. I then did some more knocks, and we listened again. Then off in the distance, we heard more knocks in response. Then the other ridge to the right we began hearing knocks. Sam at this point was beginning to get freaked out a little and was perplexed as to what it could be. I, at the time, was such a hard skeptic I carried on and insisted that it was a person or a woodpecker. But who in the world would be out there? Deeper in the woods than we are, on private land? What woodpecker makes 3 loud, booming knocks on the tree that sound exactly like the knocks we make? Sam voiced his rebuttal. I ignored these arguments and held strong to the fact that there is no Bigfoot. I then insisted that we push the envelope by doing whoops and howls, just like they do on TV. Sam was not very enthused by this idea, being the humbler and smarter one of us that night, knowing sometimes there are certain things you don't mess with. But at that time I was full of piss and vinegar and stubborn as a mule about the fact that Bigfoot is not real. I also had brought a gun with me and was certain I could fight off anything we would need to fight off. So we started howling into the woods. It was dark that night, being a new moon, and beyond the firelight you couldn't see a damn thing. We would howl and wait, listening for a reply. After a few howls, the excitement of what was that? Started to fade, and my logical, rational, science-based theory of the woodpecker began to appear true. Then, out of the dark distance came one of the strangest sounds I've ever heard. A howl. Not a canine howl, not an owl's hoot, but a ducking ape howl. Sam's eyes were as big as backhoe tires, and even I was finding it hard to reason that one. Despite this, I continued my ignorant stubbornness and threw out another howl. Off to the left ridge, it replied to us again, the clearest ape whoop I've ever heard. It sounded as if it were recorded by researchers in the Congo. I looked at Sam, myself feeling more curious and excited than anything else. I reiterated, doo-oo-ood. Then something truly unexplainable and spooky happened. More whoops and howls began on the ridge to the right and further down the valley. And they weren't random, they had etiquette, as if they were chatting back and forth with each other. The one to the left would howl, the one to the right would whoop and howl, the first would respond, and then the one further down the valley would chime in. Sam was really freaked out now and began considering if we should leave. I, being a stubborn idiot, claimed it was owls. Owls? We both grew up in these hollers. I've heard owls. Are you going to tell me that was one? Have you ever in your life heard an owl that sounded like a ducking ape? Sam argued against my claim. Well, no, but there's no way Bigfoot is real. It has to be a bunch of owls speaking to each other. There's nothing else it could be. I replied, half laughing in astonishment and disbelief about what was unfolding that night. Sam and I kind of bickered for a minute over it and then decided the wisest decision was to stop antagonizing whatever it was in the woods miles around us whooping and knocking. It wasn't too long after that we decided to go to bed. I crawled into my tent, and Sam into his hammock. We left the fire going, and every time it died down, the woods came to life. Whether it was paranoia or paranormal, something was stirring. All around camp we could hear what sounded like things being thrown and footsteps. From time to time, we would hear another knock or a howl coming from a new position. Sam would leap out of his hammock and chuck loads of wood onto the fire and make it as big as possible. He would then lay back down to sleep. This repeated about 3 more times. Each time the fire died, things got more and more spookier. A few times Sam would say, "Did you hear that?" And every time I would just blame it on possums nearing camp, hoping to find food scraps. Well, about the 3rd time, Sam ran out of firewood. Meaning that this time when the fire died, it died for good, leaving us to the dark void of the Appalachian holler. I vividly remember I had fallen asleep before the fire died, and after it died, there was so much stirring around camp, I began to wake up. I was slowly waking up, thinking I was having some sort of nightmare, when I finally fully sobered and realized that my dream was pleasant. It was reality that was full of frightening sounds and things that go bump in the night. The woods around us had become louder with unexplainable movement, the movement of multiple large things. The whooping and knocking had stopped, which did not comfort me, with all the new sounds right outside my door. There was maybe a 30-yard perimeter around camp that the sounds did not cross. Then suddenly, an extremely loud crashing began through the twigs, leaves, and branches. It was something large, running at full sprint through the woods. Starting maybe 50 yards away and running straight towards our camp. It grew louder and louder until the sound of crushing leaves turned to crinkling tarp. The creature was standing on the tarp my tent was situated on. I was frozen. Like a child, frozen in fear, eyes wide open. My heart was pounding out of my chest so hard I thought it would explode. I then heard, high above my tent, not near the ground, not 4 feet up, but high above it, the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. It was the sound of a huff and blow, exactly the way you hear a gorilla do it on TV. Or how the apes in Planet of the Apes do it. 3 forceful huffs and blows, then the creature turned around and ran back the way it came, back into the darkness of the night. Sam practically leapt out of his hammock and said, "You had to have heard that." I replied with, "Yeah, let's get the duck out of here." I slid around into the chamber of my 30-30 and crawled out of the tent. We both hurriedly grabbed only our essentials and started heading out of the woods. Using shitty dim flashlights, we made our way up the hill. Frantically, we looked behind us into the terrible night, striving to move swiftly without running. We hiked a long way, and by the time we made it back to the house, it was far past midnight. We never did see what it was that charged us, and we never did hear anything else after that. But whatever it was, it scared us enough to make us hike out in the dead of night and leave all of our gear there. We returned the next morning in full daylight to gather our things. Looking back, I wish we had surveyed the area for tracks or some clue as to what it was, but at the time we did not want to be down there for any longer than we had to. Having been some years since this happened, I would go down there in a heartbeat and not think a thing of it. When I come home, I usually feel a sense of ease in the woods. It feels like a weight is lifted off of your shoulders knowing there are no cougars or grizzly bears to worry about. For my western outdoorsy folk, familiar with cougar country, reading this and thinking, "I don't feel a weight in the woods," my reply would be the question, "Have you noticed you've been stalked before?" Cougars are some of the sneakiest creatures in the animal kingdom, and just because you've never noticed it doesn't mean it hasn't happened. I myself have been stalked. I've written about it here previously. It's a feeling that will stick with you and definitely put you on edge in cougar country for a long time after. I have a colleague who guides western big game in New Mexico. He once told me a story about how, during a hunt, he had a fellow guide spotting for him. That guide watched as a cougar stalked my friend through a grove of trees before giving up. My friend never had the slightest idea he was being stalked. I believe it is inevitable for an avid outdoorsman in cougar country. And as far as grizzly country, it's a similar feeling but a little different. Most bear encounters happen because you surprise the bear in thick woods. I have many friends from my time in Alaska who would share stories of being charged by monster grizzlies from out of nowhere. They're just hiking along, and then boom. 800 pounds of death is blasting straight towards them. And the consensus is the same amongst them: if you spend enough time out there, it will happen eventually. I luckily was never charged during my time in Alaska. I avoided known bear hangouts. But the few times I spent time in bear country, I always had this jack-in-the-box anxiety, just waiting for it to happen. What is funny, though, is despite that weight being lifted initially, an old feeling always returns. I know it's not some sort of psychological thing having to do with that patch of woods specifically, because I feel it in most places in Appalachia. It's a feeling of being watched, a feeling that something is there, and a feeling of dread. And it amplifies every time you hear some strange crashing in the woods or a sound you cannot explain. Most of the times I've experienced this, I've had a gun. And I think to myself, come on, man. You're the most badass thing out here. Yet I can never shake that anxiety. My brother, without having ever heard this story, reluctantly asked me over the phone one day, "Don't think I'm crazy, but have you ever felt creeped out in the woods below the house? I don't know what it is, but every time I go down there I feel like I'm being watched, and I get filled with dread." Hearing him say that sent shivers down my back. Simply because I always dismissed this feeling, I've swept this story under the rug for years, telling myself it was just a bear, etc. to hear my brother, who is a Marine, tell me that certified to me that I was not simply being a coward. I've only ever felt this in two regions of the country: Appalachia and the redwood forests of Northern California. Now some of you may be listening to this, thinking that I am a nut job Bigfoot believer. I've been reluctant to share this story for that reason. But I want to end this by saying I have no idea what it was that made those calls that night. I also have no idea what it was that busted into our camp. We never did lay our eyes on anything. But I want to reiterate that the story is true. Verbatim to how it happened, as I can recall it, without any embellishment. I have no idea what it was, and you can make your own decision as to what you think it was. But being an experienced woodsman, I have never experienced something like that since, and I have no worldly explanation for it. Those were the events that transpired that night, and I'll let you make of that what you will. Received a strange response to whistling in the woods. A few years ago in college, I worked the opening shift at a coffee shop. In the summertime, I would get up early as the sun rose and sometimes stop by a trail on my way to work to wake myself up with a quick walk. The trail was only accessible off of a narrow, long, winding dirt road, and this dirt road was off of a main road with no houses. The trail was poorly marked, so not many people would ever stop by, and if there was ever anyone else, you would either see their car parked in the small 3-car gravel lot at the trailhead or would have to pass them on the narrow dirt road. You would have to walk a long way down a main highway road to get there otherwise. So back to the shave and a haircut bit. I parked there one morning, sitting in my car with the window down, when I heard a bird singing what sounded like the 2 bits. Part of the song. Tired and seeking to find humor in the early hour, I chuckled softly and whistled the shave and a haircut refrain, anticipating a response from the bird. We went back and forth with our little game a few more times until the bird stopped responding, so I figured it flew off. Before I got out of my car, though, I gave it one last whistle. And I'm glad I did. Because as soon as I whistled shave and a haircut, and waited for a response, I heard 2 very loud and very human claps in the 2 bits. Rhythm, not far from where I was parked. Drove the duck out of there, and there was no one on the roads for miles. Not the most terrifying story on here, but it weirds me out to think someone might have just been out there in the woods watching me alone in my car. My wife and I hiked and camped quite a bit before we had our first kid, now 1 year old. We have done some backpacking, but most of our camping has involved driving down a Forest Service road to avoid crowds and noise. In 2016, we decided, after 3 nights in a national forest and adjacent national park, we'd stay at an FS campsite. A change from dispersed camping. Despite being far from any town, the campsite still features a bathroom. We had a wonderful time during the day. We enjoyed swimming in a lake. Yada yada. Awesome place. The campsite was primarily occupied by small families. One noteworthy group, loudish people, though well out of sight on the other side of a stand of trees. They brought many cars of all types, at least those that could drive down the road, non-paved for a good 2 miles, not bad though. But whatever. Let people have fun. I didn't care about the noise. Come night. We go to bed early, no fire, as we wake up early to hike before the sun beats down. The group is still loud. My wife does the earplugs. I'm able to ignore it and sleep. No problem. Come 1 a.m. I wake up, perhaps due to the group noise, I don't know. I can hear fewer of them, maybe 4 to 5 people that were audible. Enough to make out every 4th or 5th word. Despite the loud drunkenness, the initial atmosphere was friendly. Cursing, laughing. Next thing I hear, a guy calls a lady a bad word. And shit goes downhill from there. Now they are yelling expletives that I can mostly make out because of the yelling. Women and men are both telling each other to duck off. Luckily my wife is still asleep. Out of this mess of people yelling, a woman just starts screaming. Shrieking. Something changed and happened to her. This wasn't just someone joining the verbal fight. This was the first time my heart rate went up. WTF is happening? Even while others in the group are still yelling, I can tell the shrieking girl is moving away from the group but is still yelling loud. Like distorting your voice yelling. Her yells turn into the word help as she moves. And duck, I can begin to tell she is getting closer to the tent site area where I am. Pause real quick, let me give the layout of my campsite, which is key. Around one bend of a large lake, there are several camp areas, which means multiple 6 to 12 campsite pods, each accessible by a walking trail. There is an area to park with each campsite near each trail. The dirt road swings around the lake to each parking area. This yelling group was in the pod next to mine, not the same campsite. The screaming girl is getting closer, but it's hard to yell. Then her screams for help become clear, where I'm able to make out, help. Someone is trying to stab me. I can hear her move from the road to the parking area where my car is parked, coming closer to the trailhead that connects to my campsite. In my head, duck, duck, don't come to the trail, don't come to the trail. My tent is the first one once you enter the trail. My wife is still sleeping through the yelling. I may come across as a hypocrite for not taking the lead in this situation, but I don't care. I'm not touching drunk people's drama. Sure enough, she starts down the trail. The trail splits, and I'm on the right. I'm thinking, go left, go left. My wife is starting to wake up and pulls out the earplug. I turn to her, it's okay, it's okay. Nope. The yelling girl turns right. She strolls directly towards our tent. Stands next to it and says, help me. Can you please help me? She is sobbing. I get up first and open the tent. In the twilight and the light from the girl's phone, I can see she is a ducking teenager. She appears to be heavily intoxicated. Not bleeding or stabbed, luckily. I'm worn out and don't respond well, sputtering a bit. I say things like, I don't know. We can't. My wife pops up and handles the situation like a boss. Calming her down. Asking her name. Sitting her down on the picnic table. De-escalating. Take a second. Imagine waking up to someone screaming help. At 1 a.m. next to your tent, not sure how my wife handled that so well. The girl's story can be summarized as follows. She is 16. Her cousin got jealous about hugging her boyfriend, threatened her, and maybe tried to stab the 16-year-old. All were drinking. Meanwhile, we can hear people over in the campsite continuing to rage, yelling at each other. It is now mostly just two guys yelling at each other. My wife instructs the girl to drink water and stay away from her cousin. They were going over options. I'm trying to use either of our phones, my wife's and mine, to call the police. No signal. T-Mobile. Luckily, other campers have woken up and come to our area. They have a signal and call the police, thank God. The girl has calmed down at this point and wants to leave. We are all weary as we can still hear the dudes screaming at each other. The girl abruptly leaves. My wife and I, plus two other campers, are standing in the parking area, near the trail, wondering what just happened. The dudes yelling in the background escalate to a fistfight. You can hear skin slaps like someone got popped. Falling into bushes. Shouting. The four of us were sitting there, waiting for the police. This goes on for a while. For 30 minutes, there were no police present, which is understandable considering the location. Suddenly the 16-year-old girl comes back. She has half a fifth of vodka in her hand. Now she is cursing. I'm going to duck her up. I have guns. My mom has a gun at the house. My wife and the two campers whip out their negotiation skills and talk her down. Wife gets 16 years/0 to give up the bottle and sit on the ground. Do you think ducking her up is a good decision right now? I'm looking at my wife like, is that going to work? The girl is like, no, lol, I'm such a loser with my capabilities right now. I am still figuring out my role in all of this. The teenager then reveals that her mom is on the tribal council. She said everyone in the group will be in trouble over this. I didn't realize, but apparently that is important shit to people in that area. Guys in the background are still yelling. A second fistfight ensues. Police finally get there. Story speeds up. In short, police get the story told to them. I see eyebrows go up when the girl mentions who her mom is. They, seemingly reluctant, pack the teenager into the car, and as soon as they move her into the car, she screams violently. Doors close, and you can still hear that screaming. The fighting dudes/group must have seen the lights, as that commotion stops. The police talk to the group. Cops leave with the girl. Then it's quiet. It's close to 3 a.m. Shaken, the wife and I go back to our tent and discuss next steps. Should we stay? Decided we were leaving first thing in the morning. But while lying there as if to sleep, only 5 minutes later, the group again begins to shout at each other. They shouted expletives like we're ducked and duck you. Nope, we're out. So, in the dark, we quietly packed the car. For some reason, my wife and I were concerned the group would hear us. The tent goes in unfolded. Fast. Once everything is in, when we start the car, suddenly one of the dudes from the fighting group sprints over to our parking lot like he is about to stop us. First time seeing him, shirtless skinny guy in shorts. I accelerate quickly toward him, he is in the middle of the lot, then turn toward the road and get out of there. Nearly 3 hours of driving back to the city. Please explain to me what I witnessed on a hunting trip. This happened to me over the weekend during a hunting trip. I spent last night trying to Google and figure out what the hell I saw. I haven't found anything that doesn't seem like conspiracy craziness, so I'm open to any suggestions. A family friend has a few hundred acres in Tennessee. Once a year my dad, uncle, me, and the guys in the family that own the land go on a week-long hunting trip. They have a cabin and a trailer tucked away at the edge of the mountain that we stay at during the week. There is no running water, and we use a generator for lights during the evening. Phone service is non-existent out there. The nearest town is Murphy, Tennessee, which is about 50 minutes away by car. Typically, we get out to tree stands/ground blinds around 4 a.m. and then come back to the camp around 9ish, grab something to eat, and nap, and then head back to hunt until sundown. All week my uncle and I hunted the same plot. It was on the east side of the property and took about 20 minutes by four-wheeler. We would park the four-wheeler in this big clearing, and then the ground blind I was hunting from was another 15 minutes or so by foot. It's a rough 15 minutes too. I basically walk along this ridge line on the side of the mountain, and the blind is set just inside the underbrush of a tree line that overlooks an opening at the start of a river. My uncle was hunting in a blind that was a little closer walk and probably 30 minutes away from me. We hunted the same spot Sunday through Thursday. Thursday evening we were all drinking beer and hanging out by the fire. My uncle, having not seen anything all week, wanted to go to the plot my dad was hunting. It's like a 30-minute walk from the camp, you don't even need a four-wheeler to get there. I had killed a deer the first afternoon there and seen a bunch of does that evening right before sunset, so I wanted to stay where I was. So Friday morning, after we hunted, I helped him pack up his blind, ride it out to the plot my dad had been on, and help him get set up for that evening. I took the four-wheeler by myself that afternoon and continued hunting the same ground blind. The same thing as I had done all week, everything was fine. Nothing out of the ordinary, until Saturday morning. I had gone out by myself again that morning and had watched a bunch of deer that crept up right before the sun started coming up. They were a bit further than I wanted to shoot, and when they got closer to the edge of the river, they weren't big enough or were too young for me to justify shooting. I watched them until they retreated back into the woods, and at this point it's probably 8:30 a.m. or so, and the sun is fully up. Now this is embarrassing for me, but oh well. Having spent almost an entire week packed in this trailer with two other guys and no privacy, I decided I was going to rub one out before I went back to the camp. Every hunter has done it. I don't care if you admit it or not, lol. Now I'm sitting there doing my thing, and even though nobody ever walks up on you while you're hunting out there, I'm still on high alert, making sure I don't get caught by one of the guys while I'm doing this. I'm laid back in this chair inside the blind, basically one eye open looking out in front of me and every now and again peeking behind me through the mesh to make sure no one is coming. That's when I started hearing crunching. I knew they were people's footsteps, and I could tell there was more than one person. It was to my right, and the mesh of the ground blind and underbrush kept me from being able to see who it was. I calmly put my junk away and quietly leaned up so when my uncle or whoever it was came up, I could act like I was just sitting there hunting. Keep in mind we are so far out in the sticks that it never even occurred to me that it could be anybody other than someone I was hunting with. I listened to them walking, and finally I slowly stood up and poked my head out the blind and peeked over the underbrush. There were 4 people walking towards the river in a line. They were wearing these black cloak-looking clothes, like something they wear in Harry Potter, with these furry hats that covered most of their faces. It looked like some weird cult, but the guy in the back of the line was completely naked. He looked disgusting. His hair was curly and way too long, and he had a big beard that looked nasty, like it had a bunch of leaves and shit in it. I'm bundled up with hand warmers in my pockets because it's like 25 to 30 degrees out. This guy had to be freezing. No shoes either. This is thick underbrush we're talking about walking through. Rocks jutting up from the ground and shit. No sane person is out there barefoot, much less completely naked. The guy had to be 115 pounds too, just completely unhealthy looking, like these people had been keeping him prisoner or something. The sight of these guys was so unnerving to me that I was still standing there frozen in an awkward half-stand, half-bent over position with my head out the blind watching them before it clicked with me that I needed to slowly sit down. At that point they had passed the point of the blind where I couldn't see them and were walking with their backs to me towards the river. I slowly sat down and put my rifle in my lap and watched them all step ankle deep into the river. They were facing side profile away from me towards the woods, and I could see 2 of the clothed people moving around the naked guy, and one of them was standing still holding their arm out in front of them. I got the nerve to look through my scope at them, and it looked like 2 of them were washing the guy with the river water and the other one was holding their arm out, holding like a chain or something. The one holding the chain was talking but was way too far for me to hear any of it. After a few minutes, the 2 doing the washing stopped, and all 3 of them held hands around the naked guy and started moving in a circle around him while he just stood there staring ahead. They did this shit for 5 minutes at least. That doesn't seem like a long time, but 5 whole minutes of watching whatever the hell that was seemed like a lifetime. Something of note. That clicked with me last night. Whatever they were doing seemed time-based. My watch beeped at 9 o'clock and nearly gave me a heart attack. There was no way they could hear it, but in my mind, I imagined them all turning and staring at me. But right after my watch beeped, they stopped a few seconds later, so 9 o'clock on the dot. The 3 clothed people stepped back in a line in front of the naked guy, and they walked back the way they came from. Exactly like they came in. None of them talked or broke formation. It was scary because I could have been in their line of sight for the first time. They never saw me, though, and I watched them, once they passed me, head back up the mountain from where I assumed they originally came. I waited for 30 minutes or so and booked it out of there so fast.